I don't care who you think you are. Either you leave this aircraft voluntarily, or I'll have security remove you by force." The words cut through the pristine air of the Gulfstream G650 cabin, like a serrated blade, harsh and unexpected. The $70 million private jet sat gleaming on the sun-drenched tarmac of Aspen-Pitkin County Airport, its sleek white fuselage reflecting the golden Colorado light. Inside, what should have been an atmosphere of luxury and calm had transformed into a scene of shocking confrontation. What the uniformed pilot couldn't possibly know was that in exactly 30 minutes, his 35-year career would collapse completely. The commands he barked so confidently would become the most expensive words he'd ever spoken. Outside the oval windows, the majestic Rocky Mountains stood silent witness to the drama unfolding within the aircraft. At nearly 8,000 feet elevation, Aspen's air carried the scent of pine wealth and privilege. This was where the global elite touched down in their private aircraft. Movie stars, tech billionaires, hedge fund magnates. A high-altitude playground where money whispered and power often shouted. The sleek Gulfstream G650 was the crown jewel of private aviation, capable of flying 7,000 nautical miles without refueling, cruising at Mach 0.925, just shy of the sound barrier. Its serial number and registration, N7842B, marked it as one of the most sought-after private jets in the world, with a 5-year waiting list just to purchase one. The tail displayed the discreet logo of Summit Aviation, the premium charter company that managed the aircraft. The jet's boarding stairs were still extended, the cabin door open to the mountain air. A small crowd of ground crew had paused their work, sensing the unusual tension emanating from within. The FBO fixed base operator manager glanced up from his clipboard, brow furrowed at the raised voice he'd heard from inside the aircraft. What should have been a routine departure, the kind that happened dozens of times daily at this exclusive airport, had suddenly become something entirely different. The atmosphere on the tarmac shifted from professional efficiency to uncomfortable uncertainty. Moments earlier, the pre-flight preparation had been proceeding normally. The jet had been fueled, catered, and readied for its transcontinental journey to Teterboro, New Jersey. But now, standing in the doorway between the cockpit and the main cabin, Captain William Hargrove had drawn a line, one that would soon erase everything he'd built over decades in the cockpit. The young black woman seated in the cream leather chair didn't flinch at his threat. She remained perfectly still, her expression a mask of composed dignity in the face of his aggression. The tension between them seemed to physically thicken the air in the cabin. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea what was about to happen. He had no idea that this moment would soon become infamous in aviation circles, from New York to Dubai, from London to Singapore. The Aspen air might have been thin, but the tension inside that Gulfstream cabin was dense enough to suffocate everyone present. The next few minutes would alter the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Dr. Maya Rhodes had felt the familiar weight of exhaustion lifting from her shoulders as she'd walked across the sun-warmed tarmac toward the waiting Gulfstream. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant bun, her face free of makeup after 3 grueling days of negotiations. She wore charcoal gray Lululemon leggings, a simple white long-sleeve tee, and a soft oatmeal-colored cashmere hoodie, comfortable clothes for the 4-hour flight back to New Jersey. On her feet were a pair of discreet but expensive Allbirds sneakers. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or power. Nothing except perhaps the profound sense of belonging that emanated from her. A quality that couldn't be purchased or faked. The acquisition had been exhausting, but successful. After 72 hours of marathon negotiations, Helios Biotherapeutics, the company she had built from a research concept into a billion-dollar enterprise, had just acquired Novus Genomics, a promising biotech firm with complementary patents in gene therapy. The deal would accelerate her company's development timeline by at least 18 months, bringing revolutionary treatments to patients who desperately needed them. Maya had founded Helios 7 years earlier, after completing her PhD in biomedical engineering at MIT, where her groundbreaking research in cellular regeneration had turned the field upside down. She'd been offered lucrative positions at every major pharmaceutical company, but she'd chosen independence, believing she could move faster and maintain her research integrity by building something of her own. She'd been right. Starting in a small lab with 3 employees and a single angel investor who believed in her vision, she'd grown Helios into a powerhouse with over 400 employees and a valuation that had recently crossed the billion-dollar threshold. Her work focused on developing treatments for previously incurable genetic conditions, and the acquisition of Novus would allow her to expand her focus to include several rare childhood diseases. As she'd approached the gleaming aircraft, Maya had allowed herself to feel a moment of pride, not in the trappings of success like the private jet, but in what the resources represented: the ability to save time, to move efficiently, to accelerate the work that mattered. The G650 wasn't a luxury to her. It was a tool that compressed time and space in service of her mission. The weight of the past 3 days showed in the slight darkening beneath her eyes, the only visible sign of her exhaustion. The negotiations had been particularly challenging because the CEO of Novus had initially been reluctant to sell to such a young company. It had taken all of Maya's persuasive abilities, backed by solid science and financials, to convince him that Helios was the right home for the promising technology his team had developed. In her worn leather messenger bag, she carried her laptop and a stack of technical documents dense with scientific data. The fruits of the acquisition that would change the trajectory of her company forever. She'd been looking forward to reviewing them during the flight, making notes for her research team before the jet lag hit. Born to a physics professor, father and pediatrician mother in Baltimore, Maya had been raised in a household where excellence was expected and education revered. Her parents had sacrificed to send her to the best schools, and she'd rewarded their faith by earning scholarships that carried her through her undergraduate work at Johns Hopkins and her doctorate at MIT. The path hadn't been easy. As one of the few black women in her field, she'd faced skepticism and prejudice at every stage of her career. She'd been mistaken for janitorial staff in her own lab, had her ideas attributed to male colleagues in meetings, and been questioned about her credentials more times than she could count. Each time she'd responded not with anger, but with quiet excellence, letting her groundbreaking work speak for itself. Now, as the founder and CEO of Helios, she had become a reluctant role model. Featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30, profiled in Nature and Scientific American, and invited to speak at conferences worldwide. Her patents in cellular regeneration therapy were revolutionizing treatment approaches for conditions long considered untreatable. But at this moment, walking toward her chartered jet, Maya wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the 4-hour flight that would allow her to decompress, review her notes, and perhaps even catch a nap before landing in New Jersey. She was thinking about the next steps for integrating the Novus team into Helios. She was thinking about the patients whose lives might be transformed by the therapies this acquisition would accelerate. What she wasn't thinking about, what hadn't even crossed her mind, was that she would have to justify her presence on the aircraft she had leased, that she would have to defend her right to occupy the space she had paid for, that she would face yet again the assumption that she didn't belong. As she'd climbed the stairs to the jet's door, Maya had felt the mountain air fill her lungs, cool and clarifying. A moment of peace before the storm that was about to break over her. The interior of the Gulfstream G650 was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Maya stepped inside to find cream-colored leather seats, polished mahogany surfaces, and brushed metal accents creating an atmosphere of serene elegance. The cabin was spacious, by private jet standards, with a 6-foot 3-inch ceiling height that allowed even tall passengers to stand comfortably. Natural light flooded in through the aircraft's signature oval windows, 16 of them, the largest in the private aviation industry, illuminating the bespoke details that made the G650 the most coveted business jet in the world. The cabin was divided into distinct zones: a forward galley and crew rest area, a main seating area with 4 club chairs arranged around 2 tables, a mid-cabin conference grouping with seating for 4, and a rear seating area adjacent to a luxurious lavatory. The entire space was climate-controlled to perfection, maintaining an ideal temperature and humidity level, while sophisticated sound-dampening technology ensured that conversation could be conducted at normal volumes, even when the aircraft was at cruising altitude. For Maya, this aircraft wasn't just transportation. It was a sanctuary. Over the past year, since signing the exclusive 5-year lease with Summit Aviation, she had come to think of the G650 as an extension of her office, a place where she could work undisturbed or rest completely between demanding meetings around the world. The time saved by flying. Private directly translated into accelerated research timelines for Helios, which ultimately meant getting treatments to patients faster. "Good afternoon, Dr. Rhodes," greeted Sofia Rodriguez, the flight attendant, with a warm smile. "Congratulations on closing the deal. We heard the news." Sofia was in her early 30s, with an elegant bearing and an attentive demeanor that made passengers feel instantly at ease. She wore the Summit Aviation uniform, a tailored navy suit with subtle silver accents, with professional polish. Having worked the Rhodes account for the past 8 months, she had developed a solid understanding of Maya's preferences and needs. "Thank you, Sofia." Maya replied with a tired but genuine smile. "It was a tough one. I think I might sleep the entire way back to Jersey. I'll have your chamomile tea ready for you as soon as we're airborne," Sofia assured her, taking Maya's messenger bag. "The cabin is set to your preferred temperature, and I've prepared the light meal you requested." "You're a lifesaver," Maya said gratefully, settling into her favorite seat, the one with the best view and the most legroom. She let out a long, slow breath as she sank into the buttery leather, feeling the tension of the past 3 days begin to melt away. The quiet hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit created a soothing white noise that already had her eyelids growing heavy. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the beginning of decompression. The cockpit door was open, revealing the sophisticated array of avionics that controlled the multi-million-dollar aircraft. The Gulfstream's PlaneView 2 cockpit featured 4 large LCD displays, providing the pilots with engine data, flight information navigation, and systems monitoring at a glance. The aircraft was equipped with Enhanced Vision System EVS that used infrared cameras to help pilots see in darkness or poor weather, and a head-up display HUD that projected critical flight information onto a transparent screen in the pilot's line of sight. First Officer James Martinez emerged from the cockpit, a young man in his early 30s with a professional demeanor and friendly eyes. He gave Maya a respectful nod and a slight smile. "Good afternoon, Dr. Rhodes. Weather looks clear all the way to Teterboro. Should be a smooth ride today." James was relatively new to Summit Aviation, having joined the company just 2 years earlier, after a stint flying for a commercial airline. He was building his hours on private jets, hoping to eventually become a captain. He was known for his precise flying skills and calm temperament, essential qualities in the high-pressure world of private aviation, where passengers expected perfection. For Maya, the G650 was more than just a luxury. It was a time machine. In the competitive world of biotech, where breakthroughs happened at lightning speed and patents could make or break a company, the ability to be in Zurich one day and San Francisco the next was invaluable. The 5-year lease through Summit Aviation represented the single largest business expense she had ever approved, not as an indulgence, but as a strategic necessity. Inside this flying sanctuary, Maya could review confidential documents without worry, hold secure video conferences with her research team, or simply rest between the demanding meetings that filled her calendar. The aircraft was equipped with secure satellite communications, high-speed Wi-Fi, and a cabin management system that allowed passengers to control lighting, temperature, and entertainment from their smartphones. Sophia moved efficiently through the galley, preparing for departure. The sound of ice clinking in a crystal glass and the subtle aroma of the catered meal, a simple but exquisite selection of organic dishes prepared by a renowned chef in Aspen, added to the sensory cocoon of the cabin. This was Maya's space, configured to her specifications, leased with her company's funds, scheduled according to her needs. It was perhaps the only place besides her own home where she could truly relax, knowing that every detail had been arranged with her comfort and productivity in mind. What she didn't know was that her sanctuary was about to be violated. Her belonging questioned, her dignity challenged, all because she didn't fit someone's image of who should occupy a seat on a $70 million aircraft. The tranquility of the cabin was shattered by the heavy footfalls of Captain William Hargrove as he emerged from the cockpit. At 58, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", with broad shoulders and a military bearing that spoke of his years as a Navy pilot before transitioning to private aviation. His uniform was immaculate: crisp white shirt with 4 gold stripes on the epaulets, pressed black pants and shoes polished to a mirror shine. His silver-gray hair was cut in a severe military style, and his pale blue eyes scanned the cabin with the vigilance of someone always looking for potential threats. Before even acknowledging Maya, Hargrove checked his gold watch, a habit from his military days, and frowned. He straightened a cufflink that didn't need straightening and adjusted his already perfect tie. These small rituals of control were second nature to him, part of the authority he projected in every environment he entered. First Officer Martinez, he snapped, complete the exterior check again. I noticed the right landing gear inspection panel wasn't properly secured. James, who had thoroughly checked the aircraft according to protocol, looked surprised but nodded. Yes, Captain, he replied, moving toward the exit. The brief exchange revealed Hargrove's management style: demanding, micromanaging, and uncompromising. Even before the confrontation began, his need to assert dominance over his environment and subordinates was evident. Hargrove had been flying for Summit Aviation for over 15 years, having joined after an illustrious military career. He was known for his impeccable safety record and precision flying. He was also known for his rigid adherence to protocols and his old-school mentality about who belonged in the world of ultra-luxury private aviation. His eyes landed on Maya and stopped. He didn't see a brilliant scientist or a powerful CEO. He saw a young black woman in casual clothing, sitting in what he considered to be the owner's seat of his aircraft. His expression, which had been one of professional command, instantly narrowed into a look of cold, undisguised suspicion. Maya felt the change in atmosphere immediately. The hairs on the back of her neck rose, a physical warning system honed through years of navigating predominantly white spaces. Her muscles tensed imperceptibly, her breathing slowed, and her mind shifted from relaxation to heightened awareness in an instant. Hargrove didn't address Maya directly. Instead, he turned to Sophia, his voice a low growl that cut through the cabin's tranquility. Sophia, who is this? Caught off guard, Sophia blinked in confusion. Captain, this is Dr. Rhodes, our passenger. Hargrove's eyes flicked back to Maya, his expression unchanged. He completely ignored Sophia's introduction, treating it as irrelevant background noise. He took another step into the cabin, his posture radiating intimidating authority. Each movement was calculated to maximize his physical presence, to tower over the seated woman he had already decided was out of place. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, are you with the ground crew or the catering service? Sometimes they come on board to do a final check. If you're finished, you need to deplane now. We're preparing for departure." The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. Sophia's professional smile froze on her face. James, who had paused at the doorway instead of immediately leaving for the exterior check, looked alarmed, his body tensing at the captain's tone. Maya, who had been sinking into a state of blissful relaxation, opened her eyes slowly. She met Hargrove's steely gaze without flinching, her expression betraying none of the anger beginning to coil in her stomach. When she spoke, her voice was calm, level, and utterly devoid of the emotion most people would have displayed. "I believe you misheard the flight attendant," she said clearly. "I am the passenger, Dr. Maya Rhodes." Hargrove's lips curled into what might generously be called a smile, but it was cold and dismissive. "Right. The manifest says this flight is for Dr. M. Rhodes. I'm guessing that's your father or your husband. Is he running late?" The assumption was so blatant, so rooted in prejudice, that Maya felt a flash of ice in her veins. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a judgment, plain and simple. Her mouth went dry, and she felt her heart rate accelerate. Not from fear, but from the familiar, exhausting recognition that once again she would have to validate her existence in a space she had earned. "There is no he," she stated, her voice losing its warmth and taking on a harder, more precise edge. "The M stands for Maya. The aircraft is chartered for me and my company, Helios Biotherapeutics. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to settle in. We have a long flight." She turned her head to look out the window, a clear signal that the conversation was over. But Captain Hargrove was not a man who ceded control easily, especially not to someone he had already categorized and dismissed. He took another step forward, placing himself directly in her line of sight, physically imposing himself into her space. His stance was wide, his shoulders squared, the body language of a man used to intimidation as a tool. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting from condescending to confrontational. "I've been flying for 35 years. I've flown presidents, princes, and titans of industry. I know what the clientele for a G650 looks like, and with all due respect, you don't fit the profile." The insult was so direct, so blatant, that Sophia couldn't suppress a soft gasp. James took a half step forward, his expression alarmed. Captain James began more forcefully than his usual deferential tone. "I verified Dr. Rhodes's reservation myself during pre-flight. She's our regular client for this aircraft." Hargrove spun toward him, eyes flashing. "Did I ask for your input? First officer, return to your duties. Now." The sharp rebuke hung in the air. James hesitated, clearly torn between professional subordination and moral obligation. His jaw tightened as he made his decision. "Sir, with respect," he said, standing his ground. "Summit protocol requires us to verify client identity before expressing any concerns. Dr. Rhodes is properly identified in our system. Are you questioning my authority on my aircraft?" Hargrove demanded, his neck reddening with anger. Maya slowly turned her full attention back to the pilot. The calm facade remained, but something had changed in her eyes. A storm was gathering, barely contained. Her fingers pressed against the buttery leather armrest, the only outward sign of the tension coursing through her body. "The profile," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Please, Captain, enlighten me. What exactly is the profile you're referring to?" Hargrove was too arrogant, too entrenched in his prejudice, to recognize the precipice he was standing on. He mistook Maya's controlled response for defensiveness, the reaction of someone caught where they shouldn't be. "Let's not play games," he sneered. This flight costs over $100,000. I'm not about to risk my license and my reputation, because some influencer's sugar daddy booked her a joyride, and she got the tail number wrong. Now I'm going to ask you one last time, nicely. Please gather your things and exit the aircraft. The cabin of a Gulfstream G650 is designed for tranquility, engineered to insulate its occupants from the roar of the engines and the chaos of the outside world. In that moment, however, it became a pressure cooker, the silence crackling with unspoken tension. James Martinez felt cold sweat prickling his neck. In his 2 years at Summit Aviation, he had witnessed Captain Hargrove's abrasive style before, a classic old-school pilot who viewed flight attendants and even first officers as minor functionaries in his command. But this was different. This was beyond unprofessional. This was a blatant display of prejudice that violated everything Summit Aviation claimed to stand for. He watched Dr. Rhodes sitting there, her stillness a stark contrast to Hargrove's aggressive posture. He saw the look in her eyes, not fear, not even anger, but a profound, chilling disappointment, paired with something else, calculation. The confrontation had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And everyone in that cabin knew it, except perhaps Captain William Hargrove, whose arrogance had blinded him to the hole he was digging for himself with every word. Maya Rhodes had faced versions of this moment throughout her life and career, the immediate assumption that she couldn't belong in spaces of power, wealth, or achievement. It had happened in lecture halls at MIT, in conference rooms, during funding pitches in first-class airport lounges around the world. The faces and words changed, but the underlying message remained constant. You are an intruder here. As she sat in the luxurious cabin of the G650, feeling Hargrove's contemptuous gaze on her, Maya's mind worked with the same analytical precision she applied to complex genetic sequences. She calculated her options with cold clarity, all while a familiar tightness gripped her chest and a metallic taste filled her mouth. Her body's automatic response to confrontation even as her mind remained clear. She could escalate, raise her voice, pull up her company profile on her phone, recite her credentials and net worth. But experience had taught her that men like Hargrove were impervious to facts that contradicted their worldview. He would see any defensive reaction as confirmation of his suspicions, interpret any display of emotion as weakness or deception. She could comply, gather her things, and leave the aircraft, call Summit Aviation later to report the incident. But that would mean surrendering her dignity, accepting humiliation, and delaying her return to Teterboro. It would mean allowing Hargrove's prejudice to dictate her movements, something she had vowed never to do again after too many similar incidents early in her career. Or she could bypass him entirely, go straight to someone whose authority even Hargrove couldn't question. Someone who understood exactly what the G650 represented in Maya's business strategy, because he had personally negotiated the lease terms with her. As these calculations ran through her mind, a memory surfaced. Herself at 16, dressed in her best clothes, waiting in the lobby of a prestigious Baltimore hotel for her parents to pick her up after a scholarship awards ceremony. A manager had approached, informed her that this area is for guests only, and despite her polite explanation, escorted her outside to wait on the sidewalk in the rain. The shame of that moment had never fully faded, but it had hardened into resolve. Never again would she allow someone else's prejudice to displace her. The memory fueled her decision now. She wouldn't fight Hargrove directly. She would render him irrelevant. "All right, Captain," she said, her voice even and controlled. The words surprised him. He had expected resistance, not acquiescence. A smug smile began to form on his lips, the expression of a man who believes he has won an important battle. But Maya wasn't reaching for her messenger bag. Instead, with deliberate, unhurried movements, she took her iPhone from the pocket of her hoodie. She swiped through her contacts, her thumb tapping on a name, saved simply as Alexander Barrett. Hargrove watched his brow furrowing in confusion. Calling for a ride? Good. The sooner you're off the property, the better. Maya ignored him. She pressed the call button and put the phone to her ear. It rang twice before connecting. Alexander. She said, her tone shifting subtly from that of a passenger to an executive speaking to a service provider. Maya, Rhodes here. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. On the other end of the line was Alexander Barrett, the founder and CEO of Summit Aviation. He was in his Manhattan office overlooking Central Park, in the middle of a quarterly review with his executive team. But when Maya Rhodes called, he took the call. Helios Biotherapeutics wasn't just a client. It was a cornerstone client. Their 5-year lease on the G650 was one of the largest contracts in Summit's portfolio. Maya, not at all. Barrett replied, his voice warm but professional. Is everything all right? I thought you'd be airborne from Aspen by now. Hargrove's eyes widened slightly at the familiar exchange. His smug expression faltered as he realized Maya was speaking directly to his boss, and not as a supplicant, but as a peer. That's actually why I'm calling. Alexander. Maya continued, her gaze locked on Hargrove, who now stood frozen in place. There seems to be a delay. We have an issue here on the ground with your pilot, a Captain Hargrove. He seems to be under the impression that I don't belong on this aircraft. In fact, he's just threatened to have me forcibly removed by airport security. The silence on the other end of the phone was brief but profound. When Alexander Barrett spoke again, his voice had lost all its warmth. It was now cold, hard, and razor-sharp. Maya, I want you to give the phone to the captain right now. Maya held the phone out to Hargrove. Her face remained a mask of neutrality. Mr. Barrett would like a word with you, Captain. For the first time, a shadow of genuine fear crossed William Hargrove's face. Alexander Barrett was a legend in the industry, a brilliant, demanding, and utterly ruthless businessman. A direct call from him to a pilot on the tarmac was unprecedented. It was the aviation equivalent of being summoned before a judge. Hargrove's hand trembled slightly as he took the phone. It felt unnaturally heavy in his palm. He held it to his ear, his voice suddenly hoarse. This is Captain Hargrove. He didn't get to say another word. Alexander Barrett's voice, now a furious torrent, erupted from the phone, loud enough for both James and Sophia to hear every syllable. Hargrove, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Are you clinically insane? The woman you are trying to throw off that aircraft is Dr. Maya Rhodes. She is not just a client. She is our most valuable client. Her company's contract is worth more than your entire career, you arrogant fool. Hargrove flinched as if struck. His face went from flushed red to a sickly pale white in seconds. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed convulsively. He opened his mouth to speak to defend himself, but Barrett cut him off. I don't want to hear it. I don't want excuses. I don't want your profile theories. I don't want a single damn word from you except, yes, sir. You will hand the phone back to Dr. Rhodes. You will apologize to her profusely, and you will do whatever she damn well tells you to do. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Hargrove choked out the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Your career is hanging by a single thread. Hargrove Barrett's voice spat. And that thread is in Dr. Rhodes's hand. Don't you dare break it. The line went silent. Barrett had disconnected. Hargrove stood there for a long moment, the silent phone in his hand. The silence in the cabin was now one of pure, unadulterated humiliation. The king had been dethroned in his own court in front of his own subjects. Slowly, his arms stiff and robotic, he handed the phone back to Maya. His eyes, which had been so full of arrogance and derision just minutes before, were now filled with desperate, pleading terror. He had made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake, and he had made it with the one person who held all the cards. Maya took her phone back, her expression unreadable. She didn't look triumphant or smug. She looked weary, as if the entire episode had drained a vital part of her energy. She ended the call and placed the phone beside her on the seat. The power in the cabin had shifted so completely, so seismically, that the air itself felt different. Captain William Hargrove stood before her, a statue of broken pride. The swagger was gone, replaced by a rigid posture of dread. The pilot in command was no longer in command of anything, not even his own future. James Martinez and Sofia Rodriguez stood frozen, witnessing a professional execution. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from luxury to mortification in the span of minutes. Neither had ever seen Captain Hargrove, a man whose arrogance was legendary among Summit Aviation crew, reduced to such a state of complete degradation. Sophia's hands had stopped mid-motion as she'd been arranging service items. Her eyes were wide with shock, darting between Maya and Hargrove, trying to process the dramatic power reversal. As a flight attendant with over 8 years of experience in private aviation, she had witnessed her share of uncomfortable confrontations between crew and passengers. But nothing like this. Nothing with such career-ending implications. James felt simultaneously horrified for Hargrove and profoundly relieved that Maya Rhodes had the means to defend herself. He had been seconds away from a more direct intervention, a move that could have jeopardized his own position with Summit. As a first officer, still building his career, challenging a senior captain like Hargrove would have been professionally dangerous, but watching the blatant discrimination unfold had pushed him to the brink of that risk. Dr. Rhodes Hargrove began, his voice a hoarse croak. The confident baritone had vanished, replaced by a tremulous whisper that barely carried across the cabin. I apologize. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Maya looked at him, her gaze analytical. She saw not just the man, but the anatomy of his prejudice, the years of unchallenged authority, the echo chamber of a homogeneous profession, the deep-seated biases that had allowed him to look at her and see a problem instead of a person. A misunderstanding. "Captain," she asked, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "It seemed quite clear to me. You made a series of assumptions based on my age, my gender, and my race. You assumed I was staff. You assumed I was someone's mistress. You assumed I couldn't possibly be the person in charge. None of that sounds like a misunderstanding to me. It sounds like a conclusion." Hargrove's face crumpled. I was wrong. I made a mistake. A grave error in judgment." "You did," she agreed with no hint of absolution in her tone. "An error that you were willing to escalate by involving armed security. You were prepared to have me physically humiliated and removed from this aircraft. For what? For not fitting your profile." James and Sophia remained by the galley, trying to make themselves as small as possible, unwilling witnesses to a complete professional demolition. James felt a strange mix of horror for Hargrove and profound respect for Maya. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't demanding. She was simply holding up a mirror to the captain, and the reflection was devastating. Captain Hargrove James said, unable to remain silent any longer, "Dr. Rhodes is our most valued client. Her reservation was confirmed this morning. I personally verified it during pre-flight." Hargrove shot him a desperate look, part anger at the perceived betrayal, part pleading for support. But James stood his ground, his professional integrity outweighing any misplaced loyalty to Hargrove's authority. "I tried to tell you that everything was in order." James continued, his voice gaining confidence. "The passenger manifest clearly lists Dr. Maya Rhodes as our sole passenger for this flight." Sophia nodded in agreement. "Captain, I've been serving Dr. Rhodes for 8 months now. She flies this route regularly, The realization that both his first officer and flight attendant had recognized the situation as wrong from the beginning only deepened Hargrove's humiliation. Not only had he offended Summit Aviation's most valuable client, but he'd also lost the respect of his crew in the process. Dr. Rhodes. Sophia ventured carefully. Would you like me to prepare your tea now? Perhaps it might help after this situation. The simple gesture of normal service, treating Maya as the valued client she was, highlighted the absurdity of Hargrove's behavior even more starkly. That would be lovely. Sophia. Thank you, Maya replied, her tone softening slightly when addressing the flight attendant. The contrast between her interactions with Sophia and Hargrove couldn't have been clearer. One was based on mutual respect, the other on exposing a prejudice so ingrained that Hargrove hadn't even recognized it as such until it was too late. James moved toward the cockpit, eager to distance himself from the unfolding catastrophe that was his captain's career. I'll continue with the pre-flight checks. He said, his words directed at no one in particular. Hargrove remained standing before Maya, sweat now visible on his forehead, his captain's hat clutched in hands that couldn't quite keep still. The man who had entered the cabin, radiating authoritative power, now seemed physically smaller, diminished by the exposure of his own biases. I've been flying for 35 years, he said, his voice almost pleading. I've never had a complaint filed against me. Not one. Perhaps, Maya replied, that's because the people you've insulted in the past didn't have the means or position to challenge you. It doesn't mean they weren't hurt by your assumptions. Her words struck Hargrove like physical blows. The possibility that this wasn't a one-time error, but a pattern of behavior that had simply gone unchallenged, was a perspective he'd never considered, and one that terrified him now. As the reality of his situation sank in, Hargrove's desperation grew. His entire identity was wrapped up in being Captain William Hargrove, senior pilot for Summit Aviation. Without that, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. Please, he said, the word foreign on his tongue. William Hargrove didn't beg. Except now he did. Please don't do this. My career, my family, my retirement is only a few years away. Maya regarded him steadily, unmoved by his plea. You should have considered that before you attempted to humiliate me, Captain. The air in the cabin grew even heavier as Hargrove realized that his fate now rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had dismissed so contemptuously just minutes earlier. The irony was devastating. Dr. Rhodes, Hargrove said, desperation edging into his voice. Everyone makes mistakes. I admit I was wrong. Completely wrong. But surely one error in judgment doesn't erase 35 years of service. Maya didn't respond immediately. She looked past him, her eyes meeting James's, then Sophia's. She saw their discomfort, the tension in their postures, the silent acknowledgement that they were witnessing something that went beyond a simple misunderstanding. Captain Hargrove, she finally said, this isn't about a mistake. This is about a mindset. You didn't just misread my name on a manifest. You looked at me and made a series of calculated assumptions. You decided based solely on my appearance that I didn't deserve to be here, that I couldn't possibly be who I said I was. Hargrove shifted his weight, his discomfort physical now. I was only trying to maintain security protocols. He attempted grasping for professional justification. In my position, I have to be vigilant about unauthorized access to the aircraft. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. Is that why you referred to me as some influencer's sugar daddy's joyride? Was that part of your security protocol? The direct quote of his own words left Hargrove without response. There was no professional justification for language like that. His mouth opened, then closed without sound, like a fish pulled suddenly from water. Let me be clear about something. Captain Maya continued, leaning forward slightly. This jet, this multi-million-dollar machine, that you are so proud to command. I don't own it. You're right about that. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope appeared in Hargrove's eyes. A technicality, a way out. Maya extinguished it with her next words. I don't own the aircraft. I own the lease. For the next 5 years, this Gulfstream G650 tail number N7842B is for all intents and purposes mine. Summit Aviation. The company that signs your paycheck manages it for me, which means captain. That while you may be the pilot in command, you are flying my plane and you just tried to kick me off of it. The finality of her words hung in the air. Every pretense, every justification Hargrove might have clung to was stripped away. He wasn't protecting a valuable asset from an intruder. He was a glorified chauffeur who had just insulted his boss. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Dr. Rhodes, please. I have a family. I've been flying for 35 years. This is all I know. Don't let one mistake, one terrible, unforgivable mistake, end my career. Maya considered his plea. She saw the desperation in his eyes, but she also saw the man who 5 minutes earlier was prepared to ruin her day and potentially her reputation at a busy airport without a second thought, all for the sake of his own bigotry. Compassion was a virtue, but enabling prejudice was a disservice, not just to herself, but to every other person who didn't fit the profile, who might cross his path in the future. Captain Hargrove. She said, her voice taking on an edge of steel. You didn't just insult me. You threatened me. You were prepared to call armed security to forcibly remove me from an aircraft that I am paying over $4 million a year to lease. You did this based on nothing more than your own prejudiced assumptions about who belongs in this seat. She paused, letting the words sink in. The scent of Sophia's chamomile tea preparation drifted through the cabin, incongruously soothing against the tension of the confrontation. Now you're asking me for mercy, for understanding, for forgiveness. You're asking for considerations that you were completely unwilling to extend to me just moments ago. The cabin fell silent, except for the soft hum of the auxiliary power unit. Even Sophia had paused her preparation of the tea, frozen by the tension in Maya's words. Dr. Rhodes Hargrove began again, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm begging you. This job is everything to me. If it's everything to you, Maya replied evenly, then perhaps you should have considered that before you decided I was an imposter. Hargrove's face was ashen now, the reality of his situation fully dawning on him. His entire career, the prestige, the 6-figure salary, the respect he commanded, all of it was hanging by a thread, and that thread was in the hands of a woman he had dismissed without a second thought. What can I do? He asked, his voice hollow. What can I do to make this right? Maya looked at him steadily. That's the problem, Captain Hargrove. Some things can't be made right with an apology. Some behaviors are so revealing of character that they can't be unseen once they're exposed. She turned slightly toward James. First Officer Martinez, would you please contact the FBO? We'll need a replacement captain for our flight to Teterboro. James nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and regret. Yes, Dr. Rhodes, right away. The words were a clean, precise cut. Hargrove physically recoiled, staggering back a step as if he'd been struck. The blood drained from his face so rapidly that for a moment James worried he might faint. No, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Please, you can't do this. Maya's gaze returned to him, and this time it was as cold and unforgiving as the stratosphere. Captain Hargrove, your services are no longer required on this flight or any of my future flights. I suggest you collect your belongings and exit the aircraft, the one you were so eager for me to leave. She leaned back in her chair, picked up the file of scientific data from the seat beside her and opened it. The gesture was unequivocal. The conversation was over. He was dismissed. Hargrove stood there for a full 30 seconds, his world collapsing around him in the silent, luxurious cabin. The authority he had wielded with such arrogance was gone. The respect he commanded was gone. The very aircraft he considered his domain was no longer his. Without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He turned. He avoided the pitying eyes of James and Sophia. He walked the short distance to the cockpit, retrieved his flight bag and his jacket, and then walked back through the cabin, his gaze fixed on the floor. As he reached the open door, he paused for a fraction of a second, as if he might turn and make one last desperate appeal. But one look at Maya, engrossed in her papers, told him it was useless. He descended the stairs not as a respected captain, but as a man who had been summarily fired. He stepped onto the sunlit tarmac, the door of the Gulfstream closing behind him, with a soft, final thud, sealing him out of the world he had once commanded. His hard karma had just begun. The moment the Gulfstream's door closed, a profound and awkward silence enveloped the cabin. The source of the conflict was gone, but his ghost lingered. James Martinez stood stiffly near the cockpit, his mind racing through the implications of what had just happened, and what still needed to happen to get the flight airborne. Sophia began quietly, methodically checking the cabin service items, her hands moving on autopilot as she processed what she had just witnessed. Maya didn't look up from her papers for a full minute, giving her crew a moment to compose themselves. She wasn't a sadist. She took no pleasure in Hargrove's humiliation, but she understood that for a standard of decency to be maintained, a breach of that standard had to have clear and unavoidable consequences. Finally, she closed the folder and looked at her remaining crew members. Her expression was no longer severe. It was professional and direct. "James, Sophia, please come have a seat for a moment," she said, gesturing to the plush leather chairs opposite her. They exchanged a nervous glance and hesitantly sat down, perching on the edge of the seats like school children called to the principal's office. "I want to be very clear." Maya began, her voice even. "What happened here had nothing to do with either of you. Your conduct was professional, and I appreciate that. James, you attempted to intervene, and I recognize and thank you for that." James swallowed, nodding. "He shouldn't have spoken to you that way, Dr. Rhodes. There was no excuse for it." "No, there wasn't." Maya agreed. "I will be speaking to Alexander Barrett later, and I will make sure he knows that you both handled a difficult situation appropriately. Your records with Summit will not be negatively affected by this. In fact, I will ensure the opposite." Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. That's very generous." "It's not generous. It's fair," Maya corrected gently. "Now, James, have you requested the replacement pilot?" "Yes, ma'am. I spoke with dispatch at the FBO. They are coordinating with Summit. It's a busy day, but they said they'd have a new captain for us within 90 minutes. A Captain Diana Reynolds is on standby nearby and is being brought over." "Excellent," Maya replied. "Sophia, once the new captain arrives and we are cleared for takeoff, please serve the meal as planned. And for yourselves," she added, looking at their tense faces, "please help yourselves to whatever you'd like. I imagine this has been a stressful afternoon." With that, she gave them a small nod, dismissing them. They retreated to their respective areas, the tension in their shoulders easing considerably. Maya had not only resolved the problem, she had also taken care to protect the innocent parties caught in the crossfire. It was a masterclass in leadership. Maya picked up her phone and sent a brief text to her assistant back in New Jersey, informing her of the delay. Then she placed a call to Alexander Barrett. He answered on the first ring. "Maya, I just got the report from dispatch. I am beyond appalled. I cannot even begin to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened. Alexander. Maya replied, her voice calm but firm. We need to talk about what this means going forward. Absolutely. Barrett agreed immediately. What Hargrove did was inexcusable. He's been suspended pending formal termination proceedings effective immediately. We'll have a new captain with you shortly, and I've instructed our team to ensure you have our very best crew for all future flights. I appreciate that, Maya said, but this isn't just about replacing one problematic pilot. This is about a culture that allowed someone like Hargrove to feel comfortable expressing those views in a professional setting. There was a moment of silence as Barrett absorbed the weight of her words. You're right, he admitted. And I want you to know that I take full responsibility. We clearly have work to do within our organization. I'm glad you see it that way, Maya continued, because I'm going to need more than assurances. I want to see concrete changes in how Summit Aviation trains its staff and handles issues of diversity and inclusion. Of course, Barrett replied. I'm open to any suggestions you might have. I'm not interested in superficial sensitivity training or corporate platitudes, Maya said. I want a comprehensive review of your hiring practices, your training protocols, and your complaint procedures. I want to see meaningful, measurable changes that will prevent this from happening to anyone else. Maya, you have my word, Barrett said, his tone sincere. I built this company on a foundation of exceptional service, and what happened to you today represents a complete failure of that mission. I want to make this right, not just for you, but for all our clients. I believe you mean that, Alexander, Maya replied. And that's why I'm not canceling our contract. Summit Aviation has provided excellent service up until today, and I'm willing to give you the opportunity to address this issue properly. The relief in Barrett's voice was palpable. Thank you, Maya. I promise you won't regret it. We will do better, much better. I'll hold you to that, she said. Now there's the matter of James Martinez and Sofia Rodriguez. Both of them conducted themselves professionally during a very difficult situation. I want that noted in their files, and I want them to be recognized for it. Consider it done, Barrett assured her. They'll both receive commendations. Good, Maya said. And one more thing. I don't want Captain Hargrove on any Summit Aviation aircraft ever again. Not just my flights. Any flights. Barrett didn't hesitate. He's already been locked out of our scheduling system. His credentials have been suspended. He will never fly for Summit again. I can guarantee that. Thank you, Alexander, Maya said, her voice softening slightly. I know this isn't easy, but it's necessary. Maya, you're one of our most valued clients, Barrett replied. But more importantly, what happened today was wrong on every level. I would be making these same decisions regardless of who was involved. There's simply no place for that kind of behavior in our company. After concluding the call, Maya sat quietly for a moment, looking out at the mountains surrounding Aspen. The confrontation with Hargrove had drained her more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just the immediate stress of the situation. It was the cumulative weight of a lifetime of similar, if less dramatic, confrontations. The constant need to justify her presence in spaces where people like her weren't expected to be. She wondered how many other passengers had endured Hargrove's prejudice over the years. Those who perhaps hadn't had the power or position to challenge him. How many had simply accepted his condescension, swallowed their dignity, and moved on? How many had internalized the message that they didn't belong? The thought strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about one unpleasant incident or one man's career. It was about changing the underlying assumptions that made such incidents possible in the first place. If her position and influence could help bring about that change, then perhaps some good could come from today's ugliness. Outside the Gulfstream on the sun-drenched tarmac, William Hargrove stood motionless, his flight bag clutched in a white-knuckled grip. The enormity of what had just happened was still crashing over him in waves. Just 20 minutes ago, he had been Captain William Hargrove, senior pilot for Summit Aviation commander of a $70 million aircraft, a man at the absolute peak of his profession. Now he was, what, a pilot without a plane, a captain without a command, a 58-year-old man facing the terrifying prospect of starting over in an industry where youth and adaptability were increasingly valued over experience. He watched ground crew members pass by their curious glances, telling him that word was already spreading. In the small, interconnected world of private aviation, news traveled at supersonic speed. By tomorrow, everyone from Van Nuys to Teterboro would know that William Hargrove had been summarily removed from his aircraft by a passenger he had attempted to eject. A young ground technician he knew nodded awkwardly as he passed. "Everything all right, Captain?" he asked, eyes flicking to the flight bag and back to Hargrove's ashen face. Fine. Hargrove managed the lie bitter on his tongue. Just a change of plans. The technician clearly didn't believe him, but was professional enough not to pry. "Right. Well, have a good one." He hurried away, and Hargrove knew the speculation would begin the moment he was out of earshot. His phone vibrated in his pocket. With a sense of dread, he pulled it out to find a text message from Summit Aviation's chief pilot report to HR immediately upon return to base. "Do not contact scheduling. Your assignments have been reallocated." The clinical, impersonal language told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a discussion or a disciplinary hearing. This was the beginning of his professional execution. Inside the FBO's gleaming terminal, Hargrove found a quiet corner and collapsed into a leather chair. His uniform, once a source of immense pride, now felt like a costume, the regalia of a role he no longer played. He loosened his tie with trembling fingers, a gesture of defeat he would never have allowed himself just an hour earlier. Meanwhile, back in the Gulfstream, the atmosphere had transformed. The tension that had saturated the cabin during Hargrove's confrontation with Maya had dissipated, replaced by a focused professionalism as James and Sophia prepared for the arrival of the replacement captain. James was in the cockpit, reviewing the flight plan and weather reports, ensuring everything would be ready for a smooth handover. Sophia had served Maya her requested chamomile tea and was now arranging the catered meal in the galley, her movements precise and attentive. Maya sat in her customary seat, reviewing research data from the acquisition, but her mind kept returning to the confrontation. She wasn't second-guessing her decision. Hargrove's behavior had left her no choice, but she was contemplating the ripple effects that would emanate from this incident, both for her and for Summit Aviation. A soft chime from her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from her director of operations back in New Jersey. "Congratulations on closing the Novus deal. Board members thrilled. PR team preparing announcement for tomorrow morning. Need your input," unquote. The message was a jarring reminder that life and business continued beyond this isolated incident. The acquisition that would potentially help thousands of patients was still the day's most significant achievement, not the confrontation with a bigoted pilot. Outside, the distinctive sound of a vehicle approaching drew Maya's attention to the window. A black Suburban with the Summit Aviation logo had pulled up beside the aircraft. From it emerged a woman in her early 40s. Athletic build, confident stride with short blonde hair, and the unmistakable bearing of a pilot. She wore the same Summit Aviation uniform as Hargrove, but she carried it differently, less like a symbol of authority, and more like a professional tool. This had to be Captain Diana Reynolds, the replacement that James had mentioned. Maya watched as Reynolds approached the aircraft, exchanging brief words with the ground crew before ascending the stairs with purposeful efficiency. Sophia greeted her at the door. "Captain Reynolds, welcome aboard. Dr. Rhodes is seated in the main cabin." Reynolds nodded professionally, then made her way directly to Maya. Unlike Hargrove, there was no suspicion in her gaze, no automatic judgment. just the clear-eyed assessment of a professional meeting a valued client. "Dr. Rhodes," she said, extending her hand. "Diana Reynolds. I'll be your captain today. I understand there's been a situation, and I want to assure you that my priority is getting you to Teterboro safely and comfortably." Maya stood, accepting the handshake. "Thank you, Captain Reynolds. I appreciate you coming on such short notice." "Not at all," Reynolds replied. "It's an honor to fly you. I've followed your work at Helios. My sister is in medical research at Johns Hopkins, and she speaks very highly of your innovations in gene therapy." The simple acknowledgement of her professional accomplishments, something Hargrove had never even considered, wasn't lost on Maya. This was how it should be: respectful, professional interaction, based on mutual recognition of competence, not assumptions based on appearance. "That's kind of you to say," Maya responded. "Please give your sister my regards. We're always looking for talented researchers at Helios, by the way." Reynolds smiled. "I'll definitely let her know. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to review the flight plan with First Officer Martinez, and then we'll get you on your way to New Jersey." With a nod, Reynolds headed to the cockpit, leaving Maya with the distinct impression of someone who understood exactly what her job was: to transport passengers safely and professionally, not to act as a gatekeeper, determining who belonged on the aircraft. The contrast with Hargrove couldn't have been more stark. Where he had seen his role as one of authority and judgment, Reynolds saw hers as one of service and expertise. It was the difference between a leader and a ruler, between earned respect and demanded deference. As Reynolds and James began their pre-flight checks, the subtle sounds of professional aviation communication filtering from the cockpit, Maya felt the last of the tension drain from her shoulders. The aircraft was once again becoming what it was meant to be: her sanctuary, her mobile office, her time machine. Sophia approached with a gentle smile. "We should be ready for departure in about 20 minutes, Dr. Rhodes. Would you like me to serve your meal now, or would you prefer to wait until we're airborne?" "Let's wait until we're in the air," Maya decided. "I think I'd like to just close my eyes for a few minutes before then." "Of course," Sophia nodded, retreating discreetly to the galley. Outside the oval window, Maya could see William Hargrove through the FBO's glass wall. He sat alone, hunched forward, staring at his phone. Even from this distance, the defeat in his posture was evident. He looked diminished, a king without a kingdom. Maya felt no joy in his downfall, no vindictive satisfaction. What she felt was a profound weariness at the necessity of it all. In an ideal world, she wouldn't have to defend her right to occupy spaces she had earned. Men like Hargrove would not make snap judgments based on race, gender, or age. But that wasn't the world they lived in. Not yet. As Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure, Maya allowed herself to hope that perhaps today's events would ripple outward, causing at least a small shift in that reality. Perhaps the next time a pilot saw someone who didn't fit their preconceived profile, they might pause before jumping to conclusions. Perhaps other companies would hear about Summit Aviation's swift response and examine their own cultures and practices. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. A small crack in the edifice of prejudice that still structured so much of society, and for today, it would have to do. The Gulfstream's engines began their powerful whine, building to a roar as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Inside the FBO, William Hargrove looked up just in time to see the G650, his G650 until 30 minutes ago, lift gracefully into the mountain air, banking east toward New Jersey, carrying the woman he had insulted toward the life he had coveted, while he remained grounded in the ruins of his own making. The sense of loss was absolute. This wasn't just a reprimand or a suspension. As the aircraft disappeared into the vast blue canvas of the Colorado sky, William Hargrove knew, with grim certainty, that he was watching his career vanish along with it. The Gulfstream G650 had reached its cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, soaring high above the patchwork landscape of the American Midwest. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had settled into a tranquil rhythm, the white noise of the engines providing a soothing backdrop to the gentle movements of Sophia serving Maya's delayed lunch. Captain Diana Reynolds had proven herself to be everything Hargrove was not: professional, respectful, and focused on her job, rather than passing judgment on her passenger. She had completed a flawless takeoff from Aspen's challenging mountain airport, and now maintained a steady hand on the controls as they cruised eastward toward New Jersey. The meal Sophia placed before Maya was a testament to the luxury of private aviation: organic greens with seared Colorado lamb, accompanied by a glass of sparkling water with fresh lemon. Under normal circumstances, it would have been exactly the kind of post-negotiation reward Maya might have savored. But the confrontation with Hargrove had left a residual tension that dampened her appetite. As she picked at the expertly prepared food, her phone chimed with an incoming call. The screen displayed Dr. Lawrence Williams, her mentor board chairman, and the first investor who had believed in her vision for Helios 7 years ago. Lawrence was in his 60s, a distinguished black physician and biotech pioneer who had faced his own battles with prejudice throughout his career. "I should take this," Maya said to Sophia, who nodded and discreetly retreated to the galley. Lawrence, Maya answered, her voice warming for the first time since the confrontation. "I was going to call you once we landed. The Novus deal is done. We got everything we wanted, including the exclusive license on the AAV delivery system." "That's excellent news," Maya Lawrence replied, his deep voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who chose his words with care. "But that's not why I'm calling. Alexander Barrett just phoned me. He told me what happened with the pilot." Maya sighed, glancing out the window at the endless sky. Of course Barrett would have called Lawrence. The two men had known each other for years, and Barrett would be desperate to ensure that the Hargrove incident didn't jeopardize the valuable Summit Aviation contract. It was unpleasant, she acknowledged, understating the case deliberately. "But it's been handled." "So I hear," Lawrence said. "Barrett says you had the captain removed from the aircraft. He sounded terrified that you might cancel the lease." "The thought crossed my mind," Maya admitted. "But ultimately, this wasn't about Summit Aviation as a company. This was about one man and his prejudice." There was a moment of silence on the line as Lawrence considered her words. "Tell me what happened, Maya. Not the sanitized version you'll put in a formal complaint. Tell me what really happened." Maya closed her eyes briefly, then recounted the confrontation in detail. Hargrove's immediate suspicion upon seeing her, his condescending tone, his escalating threats, and finally, his explicit statement that she didn't fit the profile of someone who belonged on a G650. As she spoke, she could hear Lawrence's breathing change, the subtle sounds of controlled anger from a man who had endured similar indignities throughout his own distinguished career. "And how are you, really?" he asked when she had finished. The simple question, one that acknowledged the emotional toll of such encounters, nearly broke through her composed exterior. "I'm tired, Lawrence," she admitted, her voice softer now. "Not just from the negotiation or from this specific incident. I'm tired of having to prove my right to exist in spaces I've earned. I'm tired of being the one who has to remain calm and composed while others indulge their prejudice. I'm tired of turning these moments into teaching opportunities instead of just being allowed to do my job like everyone else." "I know," Lawrence said, and in those 2 words was a lifetime of understanding. "But you handled it exactly right. You didn't allow him to diminish you. You maintained your dignity. And most importantly, you ensured there would be consequences." "I didn't set out to end his career," Maya said, surprising herself with the admission. "That wasn't my goal when I called Barrett." "But you're not sorry that it happened," Lawrence observed. It wasn't a question. "No, Maya confirmed after a moment's reflection. I'm not sorry. Men like Hargrove have built careers on the assumption that their judgment, even when based purely on prejudice, should go unchallenged. Someone needed to show him that actions have consequences. And you were in a position to be that someone, Lawrence said. Most people aren't. They endure the humiliation, swallow their dignity, and move on because they don't have the power to do otherwise. His words echoed Maya's earlier thoughts so precisely that she wondered if great minds truly did think alike, or if this was simply the universal experience of successful Black professionals, the constant awareness of how power and race intersected in their lives. I've been thinking about that, she said, about all the people who might have faced Hargrove's prejudice over the years, but couldn't do what I did today. People who just had to take it. And that's why his firing isn't just about you or this one incident, Lawrence said. It's about establishing a standard. It's about making it clear that this behavior carries a cost, a real, tangible cost, to those who engage in it. Maya nodded, though Lawrence couldn't see her. Barrett is terrified. He's promised a complete overhaul of their training and protocols. He even mentioned hiring a consulting firm to review their corporate culture. Good, Lawrence said firmly. Fear can be a powerful motivator for change when other methods fail. But Maya, I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself in all this. Encounters like the one you had today, they take a toll even when you win. She appreciated his concern. The fact that he understood the emotional labor involved in confronting prejudice, even from a position of relative power. I'll be fine, she assured him. I'm more focused on the novice integration right now. We have a real chance to accelerate the AAV trials by at least a year with their technology. Lawrence recognized the deflection but didn't push. All right. We'll discuss the acquisition in detail at tomorrow's board meeting. But Maya, I'm proud of you. Not just for the novice deal, but for standing your ground today, for refusing to be diminished. After ending the call, Maya returned her attention to the meal before her finding her appetite somewhat restored. The conversation with Lawrence had helped her process the event, placing it in the larger context of her career and the changes she hoped to influence beyond the immediate consequences for one prejudiced pilot. As she ate, she gazed out at the clouds below, perfect pristine formations stretching to the horizon. From this altitude, the world seemed ordered, peaceful rationale. It was an illusion, of course. On the ground, things were messier, more complicated, more resistant to change. But for the first time since the confrontation, Maya felt a sense of genuine satisfaction. Not in Hargrove's downfall. There was no joy to be found there. But in the knowledge that perhaps the next person who didn't fit the profile might be treated with more consideration because of what had happened today. It wasn't justice exactly. Justice would be a world where such confrontations never occurred in the first place. But it was accountability, and sometimes that had to be enough. The moment William Hargrove had descended the aircraft steps marked the most visible manifestation of his dismissal, but the true weight of it only began to settle on him as he sat in the private lounge of the Aspen FBO, ignored by colleagues who had greeted him warmly just hours before. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Summit Aviation, this one from the head of human resources. Your company credentials have been suspended pending investigation. Security access revoked at all Summit facilities. Do not attempt to access company systems or properties until further notice. The clinical, impersonal language was a stark contrast to the respect and deference Hargrove had grown accustomed to over his 15 years with Summit. He was being treated like a security threat, not a valued senior captain with an impeccable safety record. Through the glass walls of the FBO, he could see the ground crew preparing for the G650's departure. Captain Diana Reynolds was conducting the external walk-around inspection that had been Hargrove's responsibility until an hour ago. Her movements were precise, professional. A pilot doing her job without drama or ego. The sight of someone else preparing to fly his aircraft for that was still how he thought of it, was a physical pain, a hollowness in his chest that made it difficult to breathe. The G650 had been his domain, his kingdom. Now he was exiled, watching from afar as another ruler took his place. A young pilot from another charter company walked past, then did a double-take. Captain Hargrove. "Everything okay? Thought you were on the Summit flight to Teterboro." Hargrove stiffened, unprepared for direct acknowledgement of his situation. "Change of plans," he muttered, not meeting the younger man's eyes. "Ah," the pilot replied clearly, sensing something was amiss, but professional enough not to pry. "Well, safe travels, sir." The respectful "sir," once a given, now perhaps the last time he would hear it, was another twist of the knife. Hargrove nodded curtly, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the catastrophe that had befallen him. The pilot hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I don't want to overstep, but word's starting to go around. Something about a confrontation with a passenger. I just thought you should know." Hargrove's stomach plummeted. It had already begun. The gossip, the speculation, the professional reputation disintegrating in real time. "Thank you," he managed his voice tight. "For what it's worth." The young pilot added, "I've always admired your flying. Best damn G650 captain in the business." With an awkward nod, he continued on his way, leaving Hargrove to absorb the bitter irony of the compliment. Outside, the G650's engines began their startup sequence. The high-pitched whine, gradually building to a powerful roar, was a sound Hargrove knew intimately, a sound that had once signified his mastery, his authority. Now, it was the soundtrack to his professional execution. He watched as the aircraft taxied away from the terminal, its sleek white fuselage gleaming in the mountain sunlight. Captain Reynolds was in command now, guiding the $70 million machine with the same confident authority that had once been Hargrove's hallmark. In the main cabin, Maya Rhodes would be settled in her seat, the seat he had tried to eject her from, perhaps reviewing documents, or simply enjoying the stunning view of the Rockies as the G650 climbed into the clear Colorado sky. Had she given him another thought since his dismissal? Probably not. She had bigger concerns. Running her billion-dollar company, integrating the acquisition she had just completed, advancing the medical research that had made her famous in her field. William Hargrove was likely already fading from her consciousness, a minor unpleasantness in an otherwise productive day. But she would never fade from his. She had become the inflection point in his life, the clear dividing line between before and after. Before Maya Rhodes, he had been Captain William Hargrove, senior pilot for Summit Aviation, respected aviator with 35 years of experience, commander of the most advanced private aircraft in the world. After Maya Rhodes, he was what? A cautionary tale, a disgraced pilot, an unemployed 58-year-old with specialized skills and a radioactive reputation. The G650 reached the runway threshold. Hargrove watched as it paused momentarily, Captain Reynolds conducting her final checks before takeoff. Then began its takeoff roll. The aircraft accelerated smoothly, lifting off with the graceful precision that had made the G650 the most coveted business jet in the world. It climbed steeply, banking slightly to the east as it established its course toward New Jersey. Within moments, it had dwindled to a silver speck against the vast blue canvas of the sky, and then it was gone, leaving only contrails to mark its passage. Hargrove continued to stare at the empty sky long after the aircraft had disappeared from view. He was looking not just at the physical absence of the G650, but at the void where his career had been just hours before. His phone rang, startling him from his trance-like state. It was his wife, Catherine. "Will, is everything okay?" "I just got the strangest call from Janet Barrett." Janet Barrett, Alexander Barrett's wife. The social circles of Summit Aviation's senior staff were tight-knit, with spouses often forming their own network of connections and friendships. "Catherine," he began, his voice suddenly hoarse. Something's happened. What is it? Are you all right? Was there an accident? No, not an accident. He said the word tasting bitter in his mouth. An accident was random, blameless. What had happened on that aircraft had been entirely of his own making. I've been removed from my flight. There was an incident with a passenger. Removed. What does that mean? Are you coming home on a different flight? Hargrove closed his eyes, the full implications of his situation crashing over him anew as he prepared to speak them aloud for the first time. "Catherine, I think I've lost my job." The silence that followed was heavy with shock, disbelief, and the first stirrings of fear. Their lifestyle, the house in the affluent Connecticut suburb, the country club membership, their daughter's expensive college, their planned early retirement in just a few years, all of it was built on the foundation of his six-figure salary as a senior captain. What happened? Catherine finally asked, her voice, now cautious, controlled. She was a pilot's wife. She knew how to manage crisis. "I made a mistake," he admitted, the words inadequate to the magnitude of his error. "A female passenger. I thought she didn't belong on the aircraft. I threatened to have her removed." "You? What? Why would you do that?" "She didn't look like. She was young. Casual clothes, I thought." Even as he tried to explain, Hargrove could hear how hollow his justification sounded. What could he say? That he had judged someone solely on her appearance. That he had been so certain of his judgment that he had threatened to call security. That he had been wrong. Catastrophically, career-endingly wrong. "Will," Catherine said, her voice now carrying a note of dread. "Who was she?" "Her name is Maya Rhodes. She's the CEO of some biotech company. Helios Biotherapeutics. She has a 5-year lease on the G650. The contract is worth millions to Summit." The silence that followed was different this time. Not shocked, but evaluative. Catherine was processing the implications, calculating the severity of what had happened. Janet said Alexander was furious, she finally said. She said he was in an emergency meeting with the board. Of course he was. Summit Aviation's reputation with its ultra-wealthy clientele was its most valuable asset. A senior captain harassing a major client represented an existential threat to that reputation. "I'll be on the next commercial flight home," Hargrove said, suddenly desperate to be away from Aspen, from the scene of his professional demise. "We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke the words, he knew there was nothing to figure out. His career at Summit Aviation was over. His reputation in the industry was likely destroyed. The life he had built for himself and his family was crumbling beneath him, all because of a momentary judgment. A split-second decision to view Maya Rhodes not as a client to be served, but as an intruder to be expelled. As he ended the call with Catherine, Hargrove caught his reflection in the glass wall of the FBO lounge. He still wore his captain's uniform, the 4 gold stripes on his epaulets gleaming in the sunlight. But the man inside the uniform was diminished, hollowed out by the realization that he had destroyed his career with a few careless words. The uniform was now a costume, the regalia of a role he no longer played. With heavy movements, he removed his tie and tucked it into his flight bag. Then he unfastened the epaulets from his shoulders, the gold stripes that had marked his rank and authority, now just metallic thread on fabric. Captain William Hargrove was gone. In his place sat a man facing the consequences of prejudice made visible. A man who had looked at Maya Rhodes and seen only what he expected to see, rather than who she actually was. And in that failure of vision, he had lost everything. The global headquarters of Summit Aviation occupied the 47th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park to the north and the vast urban expanse of the city to the south. The office design reflected the company's brand, sleek, modern, and unapologetically luxurious, with original artwork adorning the walls and custom furnishings throughout. 2 days after the incident in Aspen, William Hargrove stood in the reception area, feeling like an intruder in a space that had once welcomed him as a valued senior employee. The receptionist, a young woman who had greeted him warmly dozens of times before, now regarded him with careful neutrality, her smile professional but reserved. "Mr. Barrett will see you now," she informed him, gesturing toward the corridor leading to the executive suite. Hargrove had spent the intervening 48 hours in a state of suspended animation, holed up in his Greenwich home, avoiding neighbors and friends, screening calls, and trying to process the abrupt collapse of his career. The formal termination notice had arrived via courier the previous day, along with a demand to attend this meeting to complete the separation process. He had dressed carefully in his best suit, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, a crisp white shirt, and a burgundy tie. Not his uniform, which he had been instructed to return, but clothing that projected the professional authority he still desperately wanted to maintain. The walk to Barrett's office felt interminable. Employees he had known for years suddenly became engrossed in their computer screens as he passed, avoiding eye contact. Word had clearly spread throughout the company, and the collective avoidance was its own form of judgment. As he passed the open workspace of the operations department, he caught a snippet of conversation that stopped him cold. "Can't believe Hargrove did that to Dr. Rhodes," a young scheduler was saying to her colleague. "My sister works at Helios. Says she's like the most respected person in biotech." "I heard she could have sued us into oblivion," her colleague replied. "Barrett's in full damage control mode." They noticed Hargrove standing there and fell silent immediately, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. He continued walking, his face burning with humiliation. His disgrace wasn't just official. It was now the subject of water-cooler gossip throughout the company. Barrett's corner office was a showcase of Summit Aviation's success. Model aircraft in glass cases, photographs of Barrett with celebrities and world leaders who had flown on Summit jets, and a wall of awards and recognitions from industry organizations. The vast desk was positioned to take advantage of the spectacular view, placing Barrett literally and figuratively above the city. Today, however, Barrett wasn't seated behind the imposing desk. He stood by the window, looking out over the park, his back to the door when Hargrove entered. Also present was Melissa Davidson, Summit's general counsel, seated in one of the visitor chairs with a folder open before her. "Bill," Barrett said without turning his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Sit down." Hargrove took the remaining visitor chair, acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. He was no longer Captain William Hargrove, respected senior pilot. He was a terminated employee, summoned to receive his final judgment. Barrett finally turned his face a mask of controlled disappointment. At 55, Alexander Barrett was still a striking figure. Tall, fit, with silver-streaked dark hair, and the confident bearing of someone who had built a billion-dollar aviation empire from scratch. He and Hargrove had once been close, sharing meals and drinks after flights, celebrating company milestones together. That camaraderie was conspicuously absent now. "I've been trying to understand it." Barrett began returning to his desk chair but not sitting, trying to make sense of what happened on that aircraft. 35 years of flight experience, 15 years with my company, hundreds of high-profile clients, and then this. Hargrove opened his mouth to respond, but Barrett held up a hand, silencing him. "I've read the statements from First Officer Martinez and Flight Attendant Rodriguez. I've spoken at length with Dr. Rhodes. I've reviewed the cockpit voice recordings. I have a complete picture of what transpired, and I still can't comprehend it." Barrett placed his hands on the desk, leaning forward slightly. You looked at one of the most brilliant scientific minds in America, a woman who is literally changing the future of medicine. And you saw what? A fraud, an interloper, someone who didn't fit the profile. The direct question hung in the air, demanding a response. Hargrove swallowed hard. I made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice hoarse. I misread the situation completely. I thought no. Barrett cut him off sharply. Let's be precise here, Bill. You didn't misread anything. You made a judgment based solely on Dr. Rhodes's appearance, her age, her gender, her race, her casual clothing. You decided without checking the manifest, without confirming with your crew, without the most basic professional verification that she didn't belong on that aircraft. Put so starkly, the truth was undeniable. Hargrove's shoulders slumped slightly. Yes, he admitted. That's what I did. And then Barrett continued, his voice gaining intensity when she calmly identified herself. You dismissed her explanation. You escalated the situation. You threatened to have security remove her by force. You used phrases like, some influencer's sugar daddy, and told her to go back to wherever she came from. Do you deny any of this? No, Hargrove said quietly. I don't deny it. Melissa Davidson spoke up, her tone clinical and precise. Captain Hargrove, your actions violated multiple Summit Aviation policies, including our non-discrimination policy, our client service standards, and our professional conduct requirements. Any one of these violations would be grounds for termination. Collectively, they constitute gross misconduct of the most serious nature. She opened a folder and removed a document, sliding it across the desk toward Hargrove. This is your formal termination letter, outlining the specific violations and the terms of your separation from Summit Aviation. As stated previously, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. You will receive your final paycheck, including accrued vacation time, but all other benefits are discontinued as of today. Hargrove stared at the document, the legal language blurring before his eyes. This was it, the official end of his career at Summit Aviation, presented in cold, impersonal terms. There's more, Barrett said, his voice now quiet, but no less intense. As required by FAA regulations and our contractual obligations, we are obligated to report the reason for your termination to the FAA and to our insurance carriers. This report will become part of your permanent aviation record. The implication was clear and devastating. Any future employer in the aviation industry would have access to this information. Hargrove's breathing became shallow as the full consequences of his actions became apparent. Alexander, he began, desperation creeping into his voice. We've known each other for 15 years. I've flown your family. I've been part of building this company. One mistake. Stop, Barrett said, raising a hand. Just stop, Bill. This wasn't one mistake. This was a revelation of character. And let me be very clear. What you did wasn't just morally wrong. It was an existential threat to my company. Barrett walked to a whiteboard mounted on the wall and picked up a marker. With quick strokes, he wrote a number, 42 of $500,000. Do you know what this is? He asked, tapping the board with the marker. This is the value of Dr. Maya Rhodes's 5-year lease contract for the G650. Almost $43 million, Bill. Our single largest client agreement. He added another number. $250, $1,000. And this is the estimated total value of client relationships that could have been affected if Dr. Rhodes had gone public with this incident. If she had shared her experience on social media, given interviews, filed a discrimination lawsuit. The reputational damage to Summit Aviation would have been incalculable. Hargrove stared at the numbers, the financial magnitude of his actions finally becoming clear. The only reason we're not facing that nightmare scenario is because Dr. Rhodes chose discretion. Barrett continued. She could have destroyed this company with a single tweet. Instead, she gave us an opportunity to address the issue internally and make meaningful changes to our culture and training. For that act of grace, I am profoundly grateful. Barrett returned to his desk, finally sitting down, his expression grave. But make no mistake, Bill. While Dr. Rhodes may have chosen not to publicly crucify Summit Aviation, she was absolutely clear about one thing. You had to go. Not suspended, not reassigned, not retrained. Terminated. And given what you did, I couldn't possibly disagree. The door to Barrett's office opened, and Victoria Morgan, Summit's Chief Operating Officer, entered. She nodded briefly to Barrett, then took a seat at the side of the desk. Her presence added another layer of gravity to the proceedings. This wasn't just a termination meeting. It was becoming something more significant. You know why Victoria is here? Barrett asked, gesturing to his second-in-command. Hargrove shook his head slightly. Because what happened with Dr. Rhodes has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our company culture, Barrett explained. Victoria is leading our comprehensive review of hiring practices, training protocols, and complaint procedures. We're bringing in external consultants to help us identify and address biases that might be embedded in our systems. Victoria Morgan leaned forward slightly. Captain Hargrove, we've already begun analyzing past client feedback and complaints. What we're finding is troubling. What does that mean? Hargrove asked, a new worry forming. It means, Victoria replied carefully, that there appears to be a pattern of similar incidents, not as extreme as yours, but showing a consistent bias in how certain clients are treated, particularly women and people of color. The implication hung in the air. What had happened with Maya Rhodes wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern. A pattern that Summit Aviation was now being forced to acknowledge and address. So you see, Bill, Barrett continued, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about fixing a culture that somehow allowed you to believe your behavior was acceptable. Melissa Davidson slid another document across the desk. This is a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific details of the incident with Dr. Rhodes. By signing, you agree not to discuss the matter with media outlets on social media or in any public forum. In exchange, Summit Aviation will provide 4 weeks of severance pay, which is more than is required given the circumstances of your termination. Hargrove looked at the document, then back at Barrett. And if I don't sign? Barrett's expression hardened. Then you receive no severance, and we release a public statement detailing exactly why you were terminated. Your choice, Bill. The threat was clear. Sign and receive a small financial cushion while maintaining some shred of professional dignity, or refuse and have his reputation completely obliterated in a public statement from one of the industry's most respected companies. With a hand that wasn't quite steady, Hargrove took the pen Davidson offered and signed the agreement. As he did, he felt the last vestige of his former life slipping away. He was no longer negotiating or appealing. He was simply complying with the terms of his professional execution. There's one more thing, Barrett said, as Hargrove set down the pen. Something I need you to understand, not just professionally, but personally. Barrett leaned forward, his gaze intense. What you did to Dr. Rhodes, judging her, dismissing her, threatening her based solely on her appearance, it wasn't just wrong because she's a valuable client. It wasn't just wrong because it put my company at risk. It was wrong because it denied her basic human dignity. It was wrong because it perpetuated the exact kind of prejudice that has no place in modern society, let alone in my company. The personal nature of Barrett's rebuke, framed not in terms of business impact but moral failure, struck Hargrove with unexpected force. He had been prepared for professional consequences, but this judgment of his character cut deeper. I'm sorry, Hargrove said the words, feeling wholly inadequate to the magnitude of his actions. "I'm not the one you need to apologize to," Barrett replied. "But even if you could apologize to Dr. Rhodes, some things can't be undone with words. This is one of them. Your career at Summit Aviation is over, Bill. And I suspect your career in premium private aviation may be as well. Actions have consequences. Today you're facing yours." Barrett stood a clear dismissal. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings from your locker. You'll surrender your credentials, iPad manuals, and uniform items before leaving the building. Your building access has already been deactivated." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and a security officer entered. Not one of the friendly guards who had greeted Hargrove for years, but someone new. Someone who would see him not as respected Captain Hargrove, but as a terminated employee to be monitored and removed. "Goodbye," Bill Barrett said, not offering a handshake, not softening the finality of the moment, with any gesture of former friendship. "I truly hope you learn from this, not just for your sake, but for the sake of anyone else who might have faced your judgment in the future." As Hargrove was led from the office, the security officer a half step behind him, he felt dozens of eyes following his progress through the open workspace. This was the walk of shame, the public excommunication from the world he had inhabited for 15 years. The elevator ride to the locker rooms was silent and tense. The security officer maintained a professional distance, neither hostile nor sympathetic, simply executing his assigned task. In the locker room, Hargrove methodically emptied his assigned space. Family photos, spare clothes, personal items accumulated over years of employment. His uniform hung in the locker, the symbol of his authority and status, now reduced to company property to be surrendered. With mechanical movements, he removed his Summit Aviation wings pin from his suit lapel and placed it in the bin the security officer held open. 15 minutes later, William Hargrove exited the Summit Aviation headquarters for the final time, carrying a small box of personal belongings. No colleagues came to say goodbye. No one offered words of support or encouragement. The chapter of his life titled Captain William Hargrove, Senior Pilot, Summit Aviation, had closed with resounding finality. As he stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk, anonymous among the thousands of pedestrians hurrying past, William Hargrove was faced with a question he hadn't had to consider in decades. What now? The answer, if there was one, remained elusive as he hailed a taxi to take him to Grand Central Station, and the train that would carry him back to Greenwich, back to a home he might soon no longer be able to afford, to a life he no longer recognized as his own. The consequences of his prejudice were only beginning to unfold. The 6 weeks following William Hargrove's termination from Summit Aviation unfolded with the relentless momentum of an avalanche, each day bringing new challenges, new humiliations, and new realizations about the far-reaching consequences of those fateful minutes aboard the Gulfstream G650. The first week was consumed by denial. Hargrove woke each morning expecting to receive a call from Alexander Barrett, informing him that there had been a reconsideration, that his years of service and perfect safety record had outweighed one terrible lapse in judgment. The call never came. Instead, he received a certified letter from Summit Aviation's HR department containing his final paycheck, tax documents, and information about COBRA health insurance coverage, the clinical paperwork of professional severance. The second week brought the first tentative steps toward securing new employment. With forced optimism, Hargrove began reaching out to contacts at other charter companies, private flight departments, and aviation recruitment specialists. His initial emails were crafted carefully, describing his departure from Summit as a mutual separation and emphasizing his decades of experience and technical qualifications. The responses, when they came at all, were suspiciously similar. Polite acknowledgments, followed by vague promises to keep his resume on file or reach out if something suitable becomes available. No interviews were offered. No serious discussions ensued. By the third week, A pattern had emerged that could no longer be ignored. Doors that should have been open to a pilot of his caliber were firmly closed. Former colleagues who had always returned his calls now let them go to voicemail. Industry connections that had once been warm and supportive had cooled to formal politeness at best, complete silence at worst. The truth was inescapable. Word had spread throughout the tight-knit world of private aviation. Details might be scarce due to the non-disclosure agreement, but the essential facts were known. William Hargrove had been terminated from Summit Aviation after an incident involving discriminatory behavior toward a client. In an industry where client relationships were sacrosanct and corporate image paramount, such a black mark was nearly impossible to overcome. One evening, sitting at his kitchen island, scrolling through aviation job listings, Hargrove received a text from Michael Donovan, a former Summit pilot, who now worked for NetJets. "Got a minute to talk?" it read. When Hargrove called, Donovan got straight to the point. "Listen, Bill, I'm breaking protocol even telling you this, but you should know, you're on a blacklist." "A blacklist?" Hargrove repeated, his stomach sinking. "What are you talking about?" "Not an official one," Donovan clarified. "But your name has been flagged in HR systems at most of the major operators. Summit shared the reason for your termination with their insurance carriers, who shared it with other operators they insure. It's a risk management thing. But that's career-ending." Hargrove said, the reality of his situation becoming even clearer. "Yeah," Donovan agreed, his voice somber. "Look what actually happened with that passenger. The rumor mill is churning, but I'd rather hear it from you." Hargrove hesitated, painfully aware of the non-disclosure agreement he had signed. "I can't discuss the details, Michael. All I can say is that I made a serious error in judgment regarding a client. I said things I shouldn't have." "Was it about race?" Donovan asked bluntly. "Because that's what people are saying." The directness of the question left Hargrove speechless for a moment. Had his bigotry been so transparent that it was the first assumption people made, "I can't comment on," that he finally managed? "Your silence says enough," Donovan replied. "Look, Bill, I called because we were friends once, but I need to be straight with you. Whatever happened, it's poisoned the well. You need to start looking outside premium private aviation. Maybe flight instruction, or regional airlines, or cargo, somewhere where client interaction isn't part of the job." The call ended shortly after leaving Hargrove shaken by the confirmation of what he had begun to suspect. His career in high-end private aviation was effectively over. The fourth week brought financial reality crashing down. With no immediate job prospects, and the severance from Summit Aviation already depleted by regular household expenses, Hargrove and Catherine were forced to confront their precarious financial situation. Their lifestyle in Greenwich had been built entirely on his six-figure captain's salary. The mortgage on their colonial home in one of Connecticut's most exclusive communities was substantial. Their daughter Lucy's tuition at Brown University was due for the upcoming semester. Country club dues, car payments, credit card bills. All had seemed manageable when Hargrove was earning over $200,000 annually. Now they loomed as immediate threats. "We need to be practical," Catherine said one evening. Spreadsheets and financial statements spread across their kitchen island. At 56, she had maintained her elegant appearance despite the stress of recent weeks, but new lines of worry had etched themselves around her eyes. "If you don't secure a comparable position within the next month, we need to consider downsizing." "Downsizing?" Hargrove repeated the word, tasting bitter in his mouth. "You mean selling our home, leaving Greenwich?" "Yes," Catherine confirmed, her tone gentle but firm. "We have equity in the house. If we sell now, we can find something more affordable, perhaps in a different area, and create a financial cushion while you continue your job search." The fifth week brought humility. After exhausting his contacts in premium private aviation with no success, Hargrove began expanding his search to areas he would never have considered before. Commercial airlines, cargo operations, corporate flight departments for smaller companies. He even applied for a position as a flight instructor at a regional training center, a role typically filled by younger pilots building time toward more prestigious positions. The responses remained discouraging. Commercial airlines were reluctant to hire a 58-year-old pilot with no recent airline experience, regardless of his private aviation credentials. Corporate flight departments were hesitant to take on someone who had been terminated from a major charter operation. The flight school politely informed him that they were seeking instructors who could make a long-term commitment to teaching, coded language for "you're overqualified" and wouldn't stay. One evening, while attending a neighborhood barbecue, they couldn't gracefully decline. Hargrove found himself cornered by Frank Simmons, a hedge fund manager who lived 3 doors down. They had never been close. Simmons was loud and boastful, the kind of neighbor Hargrove had always found slightly distasteful, but they had maintained cordial relations through the years. "So Bill," Simmons said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "heard you had some trouble at Summit. Something about a passenger." Hargrove tensed. "I'm not discussing that, Frank." Simmons leaned closer, his breath heavy with expensive scotch. "Come on, we're all friends here. Was it some Me Too thing, or did you tell off one of those entitled tech billionaires?" Neither, Hargrove replied stiffly. "And as I said, I'm not discussing it." Simmons wasn't deterred. "Well, whatever it was, don't worry too much. These things blow over. Remember John Preston over on Maple lost everything in that insider trading scandal. Now he's back managing money for private clients. Different firm, lower profile, but still in the game." The comparison to a white-collar criminal was the final straw. Hargrove set down his drink with careful precision. "Excuse me, Frank. I need to find Catherine." As he walked away, he heard Simmons mutter, "Touchy subject, I guess." The public humiliation was becoming as difficult to bear as the professional rejection. Greenwich was a town where success was the primary social currency, where conversations revolved around promotions, bonuses, and prestigious board appointments. Being unemployed, and worse, unemployable in his field, made Hargrove an object of curiosity and gossip, a cautionary tale for cocktail party conversations. The 6th week brought the first real crisis. Lucy called from Brown, her voice tight with concern. "Dad, the bursar's office contacted me. They said my tuition payment for next semester is overdue. Is everything okay?" Hargrove had been dreading this conversation. "Lucy, sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. I'm no longer with Summit Aviation. There was an incident. I was terminated." The silence that followed was heavy with shock and confusion. "Terminated, Dad, what happened?" Constrained by the non-disclosure agreement and his own shame, Hargrove provided only the vaguest explanation: a disagreement with a client that had escalated beyond repair. He assured Lucy that he was actively seeking new employment and that they would figure out the tuition situation. After the call ended, Hargrove sat in his home office, surrounded by framed photographs documenting his aviation career, receiving his captain's stripes, standing proudly beside various aircraft he had commanded, shaking hands with Barrett at a Summit Aviation anniversary celebration. The images now seemed to mock him, reminders of a life that had disintegrated in the span of minutes. That evening, he and Catherine had the conversation they had been avoiding. "We need to list the house," she said, sliding a folder across the dining table. Inside were comparable listings and a recommendation from a local real estate agent. "If we move quickly, we can capitalize on the strong market. The agent thinks we can get $1.2 million. Hargrove stared at the documents, the reality of their situation finally impossible to deny. The home they had lived in for 12 years, where they had hosted dinner parties for colleagues and neighbors, where Lucy had grown from a child to a young woman, would need to be sold to keep them financially afloat. And where would we go? He asked the question hanging between them like a weight. I've been looking at options in North Carolina, Catherine replied, her practical nature asserting itself in the face of crisis. The cost of living is much lower. We could buy something outright with the equity from this house and eliminate our mortgage entirely. North Carolina. 1,000 miles from Greenwich, from their friends, from the life they had built. 1,000 miles from the New York aviation community, where Hargrove had established his reputation over decades. It felt like exile. And what would I do there? He asked, not really expecting an answer. Catherine reached across the table and took his hand, her touch gentle, but her eyes unflinching. You'd start over, Will. We both would. That night, alone in his study, after Catherine had gone to bed, Hargrove found himself face to face with a critical moment of self-reckoning. He pulled out his laptop and, for the first time, searched for Maya Rhodes' Helios Biotherapeutics. The screen filled with results, profiles in Forbes and Fortune, interviews in scientific journals, features on innovation websites. Photos showed a poised, confident woman speaking at conferences, accepting awards, working in laboratories. Articles detailed her groundbreaking research in gene therapy, the company she had built from scratch, the patients whose lives had been transformed by her work. This was the woman he had dismissed as an imposter, the woman he had threatened to have removed from his aircraft, the woman whose dignity he had casually disregarded based on nothing more than her appearance. As he read about her accomplishments, her doctorate from MIT, her revolutionary patents, her company's mission to develop treatments for previously incurable genetic conditions, the full magnitude of his error became undeniable. Maya Rhodes wasn't just successful, she was extraordinary. A genuine innovator making meaningful contributions to medicine and science. And he had looked at her and seen, what a fraud. An intruder, someone who didn't belong. The truth was both simple and devastating. The prejudice that had destroyed his career wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a fundamental flaw in his character, a blindness that had been there all along, unchallenged and unexamined, until it had cost him everything. For the first time since the confrontation in Aspen, William Hargrove felt something beyond self-pity or resentment. He felt shame, deep, genuine shame for what he had done, and for the person he had revealed himself to be in that moment of crisis. And with that shame came the first glimmer of something else, the recognition that if he was ever to rebuild any part of his life, he would need to start with himself, with the biases and assumptions that had led him to that fateful confrontation. It wouldn't restore his career or his former status, but it might eventually allow him to face himself in the mirror without flinching from what he saw there. As midnight approached in the quiet Greenwich house that would soon no longer be his home, William Hargrove confronted the hardest truth of all. His downfall had not begun when Maya Rhodes called Alexander Barrett, or when Barrett fired him, or when the aviation community closed ranks against him. It had begun decades earlier, with the slow accumulation of unchallenged prejudices and entitled assumptions that had finally, catastrophically manifested in that confrontation on the G650. The road back, if there was one, would be longer and harder than the fall had been, and it would begin not with reclaiming what he had lost, but with facing what he had been. 6 months after the confrontation in Aspen, Dr. Maya Rhodes stood on the gleaming trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by Helios Biotherapeutics executives and board members. In her hand was a ceremonial gavel poised to strike the bell that would signal the start of trading on a historic day, Helios's initial public offering. The room hummed with anticipation. Financial analysts had predicted that the IPO would be one of the most successful biotech offerings in recent years, with shares expected to jump significantly from their initial price of $42. The acquisition of Novus Genomics, completed 6 months earlier in Aspen, had accelerated Helios's research timeline dramatically, leading to breakthrough results in their gene therapy trials for hemophilia and a rare form of childhood blindness. 30 seconds to bell announced an NYSE official, prompting Maya to straighten her posture slightly. She wore a tailored charcoal suit with a subtle emerald blouse, professional attire appropriate for the momentous occasion, though she looked forward to changing back into more comfortable clothing for the flight back to New Jersey later that day. Lawrence Williams stood beside her, his presence a grounding force amid the excitement and pressure of the moment. At 67, he remained an imposing figure, tall, distinguished with silver hair, and the quiet gravitas of someone who had navigated both scientific breakthroughs and corporate boardrooms for decades. "Ready?" he asked quietly, his voice audible only to Maya, despite the noise of the trading floor. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Ready." The official began the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Maya brought the gavel down with firm precision. The bell rang out across the trading floor, signaling the start of the day's trading and officially marking Helios Biotherapeutics' transition from a private company to a publicly traded entity. Applause erupted from the Helios team and the NYSE staff. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for financial news outlets and the company's archives. Maya maintained her composed smile, shaking hands with the NYSE officials and acknowledging the congratulations of her team. Within minutes, the first trades began to register on the giant screens overlooking the floor. Helios shares opened at $42 and immediately began to climb. $45, $48, $52. By the time Maya and her team were escorted to a private viewing room to monitor the continued trading, the stock had reached $64, representing a more than 50% increase from the initial offering price. "Congratulations," Dr. Rhodes said, the NYSE representative, as they entered the sleek conference room overlooking Manhattan. "This is one of the strongest biotech openings we've seen in years." "Thank you," Maya replied, her attention already drawn to the screens displaying real-time trading data and financial news coverage of the IPO. CNBC was featuring an analysis segment titled, "Helios Soars: The Gene Therapy Revolution." The commentator's voice filled the room. What makes Helios particularly interesting to investors is the combination of groundbreaking science and solid business fundamentals. Dr. Maya Rhodes has assembled not only a world-class research team, but also an executive suite with deep experience in bringing complex therapies to market. The screen displayed Maya's professional headshot alongside key metrics about Helios. Current share price, now at $67 market capitalization, and projected revenue from their lead therapeutic candidates. The caption identified her as Dr. Maya Rhodes, founder and CEO, Helios Biotherapeutics, pioneering gene therapy treatments. Lawrence handed Maya a cup of coffee, prepared exactly as she preferred it. "How does it feel to be worth approximately $2.7 billion on paper?" he asked with a small smile, referencing her majority ownership stake in the now public company. Maya took a sip of the coffee, considering the question. "Surreal," she finally answered, "and a bit irrelevant. The valuation is gratifying because it means we can accelerate our research. Beyond that," she shrugged slightly, "it's just a number." Lawrence nodded, understanding perfectly. Neither of them had pursued their medical and scientific careers for personal wealth. The financial success was a means to an end, the resources to advance treatments that could transform patients' lives. By midday, Helios stock had stabilized around $72 per share, representing a 71% increase from the IPO price. Financial analysts were calling it the biotech debut of the year, with predictions of continued growth as the company's therapeutic pipeline advanced toward commercialization. Maya conducted a series of brief interviews with major financial news outlets, deftly answering questions about Helios's technology platform, clinical timeline, and competitive advantages. She navigated the financial jargon with the same precision she brought to scientific discussions, reinforcing investor confidence with each appearance. During a break between interviews, a CNBC producer approached Maya with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "Dr. Rhodes, our research team found something interesting. There's a rumor circulating in aviation circles about an incident 6 months ago involving you and Summit Aviation. Something about discrimination. Would you care to comment on that for our segment?" Maya felt a momentary tightness in her chest, the first hint of stress in an otherwise triumphant day. The incident with Hargrove had been handled privately, contained through non-disclosure agreements and Alexander Barrett's careful management. She had never intended it to become public, to be attached to her name or to Helios. "I'm afraid I can't comment on that," she replied smoothly. "Today is about Helios Biotherapeutics and our mission to develop transformative therapies for patients with genetic conditions. That's where I'd prefer to keep the focus." The producer nodded, professional enough to recognize a firm boundary. "Of course. We're more interested in your scientific breakthroughs anyway. Just doing our due diligence." As the producer walked away, Lawrence moved closer to Maya. "That was unexpected," he murmured. "Yes," Maya agreed quietly, "but not entirely surprising. The aviation community is small and interconnected. Word gets around." "Does it concern you?" Lawrence asked. Maya considered the question. "Not really. The incident was handled appropriately. Summit Aviation took decisive action. There's nothing there that reflects poorly on me or on Helios." Still, the brief exchange had cast a small shadow over what had otherwise been a perfect day. It was a reminder that even as she reached new heights of professional success, the specter of prejudice and the necessity of confronting it would never be entirely absent from her life. By late afternoon, as the closing bell approached, the Helios team had reason to celebrate. The stock had closed at £76.42, nearly double the initial offering price. The company had raised over $2 billion in capital to fund its research and clinical trials, securing its financial future for years to come. In a private moment before they left the NYSE, Lawrence pulled Maya aside. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing her a small box wrapped in simple silver paper. "A token for a significant day." Maya opened it to find a beautiful fountain pen, its barrel made of polished black resin with platinum appointments. "It's beautiful," she said, turning it in her hands to admire the craftsmanship. "Look at the inscription," Lawrence suggested. Maya tilted the pen to read the small engraving along the clip. "Change the world by being exactly who you are." She looked up at her mentor, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the message it conveyed. "Thank you, Lawrence, for everything." He nodded, understanding that her gratitude encompassed far more than the pen. It was for his early belief in her research, his investment in Helios. When it was just a concept, his guidance throughout the company's growth, and his unwavering support during challenges both professional and personal. "The G650 is waiting at Teterboro," he said, changing the subject with characteristic practicality. "Shall we head to the airport?" 3 hours later, Maya settled into her familiar seat aboard the Gulfstream G650, the same aircraft where the confrontation with Hargrove had occurred 6 months earlier. The memory of that day had faded significantly, overshadowed by the subsequent achievements and milestones that had defined the intervening months. Captain Diana Reynolds, who had replaced Hargrove that day in Aspen, had become Maya's regular pilot, developing the kind of professional rapport that made travel seamless and stress-free. Reynolds greeted Maya and Lawrence as they boarded, offering congratulations on the successful IPO before returning to the cockpit to prepare for departure. Sofia Rodriguez, now permanently assigned to the Rhodes account, had prepared the cabin according to Maya's preferences. Temperature set precisely subtle, lighting a selection of organic snacks and beverages available, but not intrusive. "Congratulations, Dr. Rhodes," Sofia said warmly as she took Maya's light coat. "The financial channels have been covering Helios all day. It sounds like an enormous success." "Thank you, Sofia," Maya replied with a genuine smile. "It's been quite a day." As the G650 taxied toward the runway, Maya gazed out at the New York skyline, golden in the late afternoon light. The IPO represented not just a personal and professional triumph, but validation of her vision for Helios, creating cutting-edge treatments for conditions long considered untreatable. The acquisition of Novus Genomics, finalized during that trip to Aspen 6 months ago, had proven even more valuable than initially projected. Their advanced delivery system for gene therapies had accelerated Helios's research timeline by nearly 18 months, allowing them to move their lead candidate for hemophilia treatment into Phase 3 clinical trials ahead of schedule. Early results had been nothing short of revolutionary, with patients showing sustained production of clotting factors after a single treatment. If the final trial results confirmed these findings, Helios would be poised to transform the standard of care for a condition that had required lifelong management. The G650 accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the evening sky, banking gently as it established its course toward New Jersey. Maya watched the city recede beneath them, the Manhattan skyline giving way to the patchwork of suburban communities, and then the darker expanse of forests and reservoirs. Lawrence, seated across from her, was reviewing financial analyses of the day's trading on his tablet. "The market cap is holding steady at just over $14 billion, he reported. "The analysts are projecting continued strength, especially if we announce the Phase 3 results on schedule next quarter." Maya nodded, but her thoughts had already moved beyond the financial metrics to the work that lay ahead. Integrating the IPO capital into their research budget, accelerating the development of their secondary pipeline candidates, expanding their manufacturing capabilities to prepare for commercial production. The confrontation with Hargrove had become a footnote in her narrative, an unpleasant incident that had been resolved decisively and had led to positive changes at Summit Aviation. Alexander Barrett had been true to his word, implementing comprehensive training programs for all staff and revising hiring practices to increase diversity at all levels of the company. Maya had renewed the G650 lease without hesitation, recognizing that Barrett's response to the incident had demonstrated his commitment to meaningful change rather than superficial gestures. The aircraft had returned to its intended role in her life, a tool that allowed her to maximize her most valuable resource time. As the G650 reached its cruising altitude, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the determined 16-year-old girl humiliated in a hotel lobby to the founder and CEO of a publicly traded biotech company valued at over $14 billion. The path had not been easy or straightforward, but each challenge had strengthened her resolve and clarified her purpose. The IPO was not an endpoint, but a milestone, another step in Helios's mission to transform the treatment of genetic conditions. The real measure of success would not be found in stock prices or market capitalization, but in the lives of patients who would benefit from the therapies Helios was developing. And as the G650 soared through the darkening sky, carrying her toward home and the next chapter of that mission, Maya Rhodes felt something that had eluded her during the grueling work of recent months, a moment of genuine satisfaction, not just in what she had accomplished, but in who she had become along the way. The young woman who had once been told she didn't belong had not only claimed her place, but had created something that transcended personal achievement, a company that was poised to change countless lives for the better. And that, more than any financial valuation or professional recognition, was the true measure of her success. The motel room in Des Moines, Iowa, was a study in utilitarian discomfort. A sagging queen-sized bed with a faded floral comforter-worn carpet that had long since lost its original color, and a bathroom where the fluorescent light buzzed incessantly. This was William Hargrove's temporary home on this dreary Tuesday night, grounded by a winter storm front that had closed smaller airports across the Midwest. 6 months after his dismissal from Summit Aviation, Hargrove had settled into a grim routine with Midwest Air Cargo. 3 nights a week, he flew the aging Metroliner on a circuit of secondary Midwest cities, Toledo to Des Moines, to Fargo, to Milwaukee, and back to Toledo. The aircraft was loud, temperamental, and devoid of the sophisticated automation that had made the G650 such a joy to fly. Manual control inputs, constant vigilance, and physical stamina were required to wrestle the aging turboprop through winter weather and maintain schedules that prioritized cargo delivery over pilot comfort. Hargrove sat on the edge of the bed, his back aching from the cramped cockpit and the cheap motel mattress. At 58, the physical demands of flying freight were taking a toll his body wasn't conditioned for after years in the relative comfort of private aviation. His uniform, a utilitarian khaki shirt and pants with the Midwest Air Cargo logo, lay crumpled on a chair awaiting tomorrow's flight. It bore little resemblance to the crisp, authoritative Summit Aviation uniform that had once been a source of pride and identity. His phone chimed with a text from Catherine Roof Leak getting worse. Called another contractor for estimate. Miss you. Stay safe. The house in North Carolina, purchased as a financial necessity after selling their Greenwich home, had proven to be a maintenance nightmare. What had appeared to be a reasonable investment during their hurried relocation had revealed its flaws only after they had committed their remaining capital to the purchase. The roof leaked, the HVAC system was failing, and the plumbing was a patchwork of questionable repairs by previous owners. Catherine was bearing the brunt of these challenges alone, in a community where they had no established connections or support network. Her part-time job at the local real estate office barely covered the ongoing repairs, while Hargrove's drastically reduced salary went toward essential living expenses and the costly commute between Charlotte and Toledo. He texted back, "Get the repair done. We'll figure out money when I'm home. Love you." The financial reality was bleak. Their savings were depleted. Lucy's education was now funded entirely by student loans. Their credit cards were approaching their limits. The commuting expenses alone, commercial flights between Charlotte and Toledo rental cars, motel rooms when weather disrupted schedules, consumed a significant portion of his income. The financial cushion from selling their Greenwich home had evaporated faster than anticipated, depleted by the unexpected home repairs and the day-to-day expenses of maintaining 2 households. Hargrove picked up his iPad, a personal device, not the company-issued tablet he had used at Summit. Out of habit, he checked the financial news, a practice left over from his previous life, when he had actively managed investments and retirement accounts, with the confidence of someone on a stable, lucrative career path. The headline that appeared on the screen froze him in place. Helios Biotherapeutics soars in blockbuster IPO shares, jumped 71% on first day of trading. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Maya Rhodes, standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, ceremonial gavel in hand, surrounded by her executive team. She looked confident, composed, and completely in her element, a woman at the pinnacle of professional achievement. The article detailed Helios's remarkable success. The company's gene therapy platform, enhanced by the acquisition of Novus Genomics 6 months earlier, had produced breakthrough results in clinical trials. Industry analysts were projecting that their treatments could revolutionize care for several previously untreatable genetic conditions. The IPO had raised over $2 billion in capital, and the company was now valued at more than $14 billion. Maya Rhodes, who retained a majority stake in Helios, was now one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the world. The article described her as a visionary scientist and business leader whose breakthrough therapies could transform medicine in the coming decade. Further down in the article was a photograph of Maya boarding a private jet, the same Gulfstream G650 that Hargrove had once commanded. The caption noted that Dr. Rhodes maintains a demanding travel schedule overseeing Helios's research operations in New Jersey and their new European headquarters in Zurich. The sight of the G650, his G650 as he still thought of it, sent a physical jolt through Hargrove's body. His stomach clenched and his mouth went dry. 6 months had passed, but the aircraft was unchanged, still gleaming and immaculate, still the pinnacle of aviation luxury and performance. The only difference was the pilot standing at the foot of the air stairs. Captain Diana Reynolds, now Maya's regular pilot, her posture professional and confident as she greeted her distinguished passenger. Hargrove stared at the image, unable to look away, yet pained by every detail. This was the world he had lost, the position he had forfeited, the future he had erased with a few moments of prejudice and arrogance. The article continued describing Helios's ambitious plans for expanding their research facilities and accelerating clinical trials for additional genetic conditions. Maya was quoted discussing the company's mission to develop transformative therapies for conditions long considered untreatable, and her commitment to ensuring these treatments would be accessible to patients, regardless of financial circumstances. There was no mention of the incident in Aspen. No reference to a confrontation with a pilot. No hint of the discrimination she had faced. That episode, which had completely derailed Hargrove's life and career, apparently didn't even merit a footnote in the narrative of Maya Rhodes's remarkable success. While his life had collapsed into a dreary cycle of cargo flights and financial anxiety, she had continued her ascent, closing acquisitions, advancing medical research, taking her company public, and potentially changing the landscape of genetic medicine forever. A knock at the door startled him. It was Ray Dalton, his co-pilot, a gruff, heavy-set man in his late 40s, with perpetually bloodshot eyes and a smoker's cough. "Hey, Bill," Ray said, leaning against the doorframe. "Tower says we're looking at another 6-hour delay minimum. Ice storm's worse than they thought. Dispatch is booking us another night. Want to grab some dinner at the diner across the street?" "Not hungry?" Hargrove replied automatically. Ray shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm going to get some meatloaf and catch the game at the bar. Join if you change your mind." After Ray left, Hargrove set the iPad down, overwhelmed by the stark contrast between his current circumstances and the parallel reality where Maya Rhodes operated. He walked to the small bathroom, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows that accentuated every line in his face. The cheap bulb buzzed and flickered, casting an intermittent sickly glow that made him look jaundiced and ghostly. The man who stared back from the mirror bore little resemblance to the confident, authoritative Captain William Hargrove of 6 months ago. His face was thinner with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. The military posture he had maintained throughout his aviation career had given way to a slight stoop, the physical manifestation of diminished confidence and chronic fatigue. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now held a perpetual wariness, the look of someone braced for the next blow. As he splashed cold water on his face, Hargrove was forced to confront a truth he had been avoiding for months. This wasn't a temporary setback. This was his new reality. At 58, with a tarnished reputation in an industry where reputation was everything, there would be no triumphant return to premium private aviation. No redemption arc. No second chance. The motel room's heater kicked on with a metallic groan, pushing tepid air through rusting vents. Outside, sleet tapped against the window, a constant reminder of the storm that had grounded him in this depressing way station. From somewhere down the hall, a couple's argument leaked through thin walls. Sharp words about money, about broken promises. Hargrove sank back onto the edge of the bed, the ancient springs creaking under his weight. The bitter irony was that he had prided himself on his judgment, his ability to assess situations and people quickly and accurately. That supposed skill had been central to his identity as a pilot in command. Yet when it mattered most, his judgment had failed catastrophically. He had looked at Maya Rhodes and seen only what his prejudices allowed him to see. Not the brilliant scientist and business leader she was, but a young black woman who didn't fit his narrow conception of who belonged on a G650. That failure of vision, that moment of blind prejudice, had cost him everything: his career, his financial security, his social standing, his self-respect. While he had been fighting to keep his home and maintain some semblance of his former life, Maya Rhodes had been changing the world. His phone rang. Catherine calling for their nightly check-in. He couldn't bring himself to answer. How could he tell her about seeing Maya Rhodes' success splashed across financial news? How could he explain the crushing finality of realizing that while his life had been destroyed, hers had continued its meteoric rise, completely untouched by their brief, catastrophic interaction? Instead, he sent a text. Delayed again. Storm worse than expected. Talk tomorrow. Love you. As the evening stretched before him, empty hours in an anonymous motel room in a city he had no connection to, William Hargrove faced the darkest moment of his fall. He had lost not just his career and financial security, but his identity, his purpose, his sense of who he was in the world. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully acknowledge the truth. Maya Rhodes hadn't destroyed his career. He had. With his prejudice, his arrogance, his inability to see beyond his own narrow expectations. She had simply stood her ground and insisted on being treated with the dignity she deserved. As rain turned to sleet against the window and the heater coughed its inadequate warmth into the dreary room, William Hargrove reached rock bottom, not in rage or resentment, but in the clear-eyed recognition of his own responsibility for the life he now led. And in that moment of clarity, painful as it was, lay the first seed of whatever redemption might still be possible. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt in Dallas was filled to capacity with representatives from every major private aviation company in North America. The annual Private Aviation Leadership Summit had drawn record attendance this year, but not for the usual discussions of fuel prices, regulatory changes, or luxury market trends. This year, a new topic dominated the agenda: building inclusive excellence in private aviation. On the stage, a panel of industry leaders was engaged in a spirited discussion. Seated at the center was Alexander Barrett, CEO of Summit Aviation, whose company had undergone a remarkable transformation over the past year. To his right sat Victoria Morgan, Summit's Chief Operating Officer, who had spearheaded their diversity and inclusion initiatives. To his left was Diana Reynolds, now Summit's Director of Flight Operations, the first woman to hold the position in the company's history. The numbers don't lie. Barrett was saying, his deep voice carrying authority even without the microphone. Since implementing our comprehensive reforms, client satisfaction scores are up 22%. Employee retention has improved by 18%, and our revenue has grown by 14% in a challenging market. This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that would be reason enough. It's about building a stronger, more resilient business. In the audience, Charles Whitman, CEO of Elite Air Services, leaned forward with interest. His company had initially been skeptical of Summit's dramatic overhaul, viewing it as a PR exercise rather than a substantive change. But the results Barrett was describing couldn't be dismissed so easily. Could you be more specific about the actual changes you've implemented? Whitman asked during the Q&A. Beyond the usual sensitivity training that everyone does. Barrett nodded to Victoria Morgan, who took the microphone. This wasn't about checking boxes. She replied, her tone matter-of-fact. We started with a comprehensive audit of every aspect of our operation. Hiring practices, training protocols, promotion patterns, client feedback systems. What we found were blind spots and biases embedded throughout our processes, often invisible to those of us who had created them. She clicked to a new slide showing a before and after comparison of Summit's recruitment materials. Look at our pilot recruitment materials from 2024. She continued. All the imagery featured older white male pilots. The language emphasized military experience and command presence. Now look at our current materials. Diverse imagery and language that emphasizes technical excellence, collaborative leadership, and exceptional client service. Diana Reynolds leaned toward her microphone. We also completely redesigned our complaint handling procedures, she added. Previously, concerns about bias or discriminatory behavior were handled internally, often buried in HR files. Now they're tracked, analyzed for patterns, and addressed systematically, not just with individual correction, but with structural changes to prevent recurrence. Barrett took back the microphone. The most important change, though, has been cultural. We've made it clear throughout the organization that respect for all clients, regardless of how they look or dress or speak, is a non-negotiable standard. One incident, which I won't detail due to confidentiality agreements, served as a powerful catalyst for change. The audience understood the reference. Though the specifics of the Hargrove incident had never been made public, rumors had circulated throughout the industry about a Summit captain who had been terminated after a confrontation with a major client over issues of race and gender. In the back of the ballroom, James Martinez, recently promoted to captain, listened with particular interest. Having witnessed the incident firsthand, he understood better than most the profound ripple effects it had created. After the panel concluded, he approached Diana Reynolds at the reception. "Captain Reynolds," he greeted her with a smile. "Congratulations on the promotion to director. It's well-deserved." "Thank you, Captain Martinez," she replied, emphasizing his new title with evident approval. "How are you finding the left seat?" "It's been a remarkable transition," he admitted. "I never expected to make captain so quickly." Reynolds nodded. "Merit-based advancement was one of the first changes we implemented. Your handling of the Rhodes incident demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and integrity we want in our captains." Martinez lowered his voice slightly. "Have you heard anything about Hargrove since—" "You know." Reynolds' expression grew serious. "Last I heard, he was flying cargo somewhere in the Midwest. It's a shame. He was a skilled pilot. But the industry has changed. What happened that day in Aspen wouldn't be tolerated by any reputable operation now." Across the country, at the National Business Aviation Association's annual convention in Las Vegas, the industry's largest gathering, diversity and inclusion had emerged as central themes for the first time in the organization's history. Panel discussions on creating inclusive cultures in private aviation and expanding the talent pipeline drew standing room-only crowds populated not just by HR professionals, but by CEOs, chief pilots, and operations directors. Jason Parker, NBAA's executive director, addressed the packed convention center during his keynote speech. "The private aviation industry has long prided itself on exceptional service," he said, scanning the diverse audience. "But for too long, our definition of exceptional has been narrow and exclusive. We've catered to a specific type of client, while assuming others don't belong in our world. That era is ending, not because of outside pressure, but because forward-thinking companies within our industry have recognized that excellence and inclusivity go hand in hand." He gestured to a slide showing demographic trends in wealth creation and private aviation usage. "The clients of tomorrow don't look like the clients of yesterday," he continued. "The entrepreneurs, innovators, and business leaders who will be chartering our aircraft and purchasing our services are increasingly diverse. If we can't see them for who they are, if we make assumptions based on appearance rather than achievement, we will fail as an industry The impact of these industry-wide discussions was being felt at flight schools across the country, where a new generation of pilots was entering the pipeline. More diverse than any before, it encouraged by scholarship programs, mentorship initiatives, and the visible success of pioneers who had broken barriers in previous decades. At Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the nation's leading aviation training institution, a young black woman named Zara Jefferson sat in the cockpit of a flight simulator practicing the complex approach procedures she would need to master for her upcoming check ride. Perfect execution. Zara, her instructor commented, as she completed the simulated instrument approach. Your precision is impressive. Thank you, sir, she replied, still focused on the instruments. Have you given any thought to where you want to go after graduation, he asked. With your skills, you'll have options. Zara didn't hesitate. Summit Aviation. Their cadet program is my first choice. The instructor nodded approvingly. They've become quite the destination employer this past year. Their new diversity initiatives are changing the landscape. Zara powered down the simulator and turned to her instructor. It's not just their diversity programs that interest me, though those are important. It's knowing that they've created a culture where everyone is judged by their skills and professionalism, not by how they look or where they come from. What Zara didn't mention was the story that had inspired her, a story that had circulated among minority aviation students about a black female CEO who had stood her ground when a Summit captain had tried to remove her from her own leased aircraft. The story had taken on almost mythic qualities, with details changing in each retelling. But its essential message remained powerful. Times were changing, and standing up for dignity could create ripples of transformation throughout an entire industry. Back in Dallas, as the Private Aviation Leadership Summit concluded, Alexander Barrett found himself in conversation with Richard Townsend, CEO of Velocity Jets, one of Summit's main competitors. I have to hand it to you, Alex Townsend said, nursing a scotch at the hotel bar. When you first announced your big diversity push, I thought it was just damage control after that incident with the pilot and the biotech CEO. Barrett raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on the specific reference. But you've turned it into a competitive advantage, Townsend continued. Your client satisfaction numbers are the best in the industry now. We're having to play catch-up. It was never about damage control, Barrett replied. Once we started looking at our own blind spots, we realized how much potential we were leaving on the table in terms of talent-client relationships and organizational effectiveness. Well, whatever your motivation, you've changed the conversation in private aviation, Townsend admitted. 6 months ago, I had to direct our HR department to develop our own inclusion initiatives. Not because I was convinced, mind you, but because our board was asking why we weren't doing what Summit was doing. Barrett smiled slightly. And now I'm convinced, Townsend said, finishing his drink. The metrics don't lie. We're seeing the same improvements in client feedback that you reported in your presentation. Turns out, treating everyone with the same level of respect and service is good business. Who would have thought? The irony in his tone acknowledged a deeper truth. These were lessons the industry should have learned decades earlier, without requiring incidents like the confrontation between Hargrove and Maya to catalyze change. As the summit attendees dispersed, returning to operations across the country and around the world, they carried with them not just new policies and procedures, but a fundamental shift in perspective. The private aviation industry would never be perfect. Biases and prejudices that had been entrenched for decades wouldn't disappear overnight. But a corner had been turned. A conversation had been started that couldn't easily be silenced. Standards had been established that would be difficult to reverse. And it had all begun with a confrontation aboard a Gulfstream G650 in Aspen, a moment when one woman had refused to accept the judgment that she didn't belong, and in doing so had helped create a world where others might never face that judgment in the first place. The Gulfstream G650, cruised at 45,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, its advanced aerodynamics and powerful Rolls-Royce engines, allowing it to maintain a speed just shy of the sound barrier. Inside the meticulously appointed cabin, Dr. Maya Rhodes sat in her customary seat, reviewing her notes for the address she would deliver at the World Health Innovation Summit in Geneva the following day. The past year had been transformative for both Maya and Helios Biotherapeutics. The company's IPO had been one of the most successful biotech offerings in recent history, raising over $2 billion in capital and establishing Helios as a major player in the pharmaceutical industry. More importantly, their lead gene therapy for hemophilia had received FDA approval 3 months earlier, transforming the treatment landscape for a condition that had previously required lifelong management. Maya glanced out the oval window at the vast expanse of ocean below, illuminated by moonlight. The G650 had become more than just transportation. It was a sanctuary where she could work undisturbed or rest completely between the demanding meetings that filled her calendar. The time saved by flying private directly translated into accelerated research timelines for Helios, which ultimately meant getting treatments to patients faster. The leather of her seat creaked softly as she shifted position. The cabin smelled faintly of sandalwood and citrus, Sophia's signature cabin scent that had become part of the familiar comfort of these flights. Outside, the wind whispered past the fuselage at nearly 600 miles per hour, though inside the cabin, that awesome speed was reduced to a gentle, almost imperceptible vibration beneath her feet. Across from her, Dr. Lawrence Williams was reviewing the latest clinical data from their childhood blindness trial, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his tablet. At 68, he remained an essential part of Helios's leadership team, his decades of experience providing valuable perspective to balance Maya's innovative approach. "These results are remarkable," Lawrence noted, looking up from the tablet. His deep voice carried the measured cadence that had become his trademark. Authoritative, without being imposing, thoughtful, without being pedantic. 87% of the patients showing meaningful improvement in visual acuity with no significant adverse events. The FDA will be impressed. Maya nodded, sharing his satisfaction in the results. "It's what we've been working toward all these years," she replied, her tone warm but focused, the voice of someone who could simultaneously appreciate achievement and see the next challenge ahead. Changing what's possible in genetic medicine. A gentle chime sounded as Captain Diana Reynolds' voice came through the cabin intercom. "Dr. Rhodes, Dr. Williams, we're about halfway across the Atlantic now. Weather ahead looks good, and we're expecting to arrive in Geneva on schedule. Is there anything you need at this time?" Reynolds' voice was crisp and professional, yet carried a natural warmth that made her communications feel like conversation rather than announcement, a stark contrast to Hargrove's stiff authoritarian style that had once filled this same cabin. "No, thank you," Captain Maya replied. "Everything is perfect." And it was. Reynolds had proven to be an exceptional pilot, skilled professional and respectful. Over the past year, she had become Maya's regular captain, developing the kind of rapport that made travel seamless and stress-free. The crew trusted her judgment implicitly, and clients appreciated her calm, confident demeanor. The flight attendant, Sofia Rodriguez, approached with a pot of herbal tea. The gentle clink of fine porcelain accompanied her movement. "Your chamomile, Dr. Rhodes," she said, refreshing Maya's cup. "And Dr. Williams, would you care for more coffee?" "Thank you," Sophia Lawrence replied, holding out his cup. "Just half, please. I'm hoping to get some sleep before we land." As Sophia returned to the galley, Lawrence set aside his tablet and studied Maya with the careful attention of someone who had known her for many years. "You seem reflective tonight," he observed. "Thinking about the summit tomorrow?" Maya smiled slightly. "Partly. But I was also thinking about how much has changed in the past year, not just with Helios, but with Summit Aviation, with the industry as a whole." Lawrence nodded, understanding the reference to the incident that had occurred aboard this very aircraft a year earlier. Alexander Barrett has been true to his word. The changes at Summit haven't been superficial. No, they haven't. Maya agreed. I've been impressed by the follow-through. The new hiring practices, the training programs, the scholarship initiative for underrepresented pilots. It's substantive change, not just PR. And all because you refuse to accept being treated as if you didn't belong, Lawrence noted. That moment could have played out very differently. Maya considered this, remembering the confrontation with Hargrove, the immediate assumption that she couldn't possibly be the client, the condescension in his tone, the threat to have her forcibly removed from the aircraft. The memory had faded in intensity, but the lessons remained vivid. I've thought about that day many times, she admitted. Not so much about Hargrove himself, but about the choice I made in that moment. I could have complied, left the aircraft to avoid conflict, filed a complaint later. That's what I might have done earlier in my career. But you didn't. Lawrence said, a note of pride in his voice. No. Maya agreed, because I recognized that it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who would come after me. Everyone who doesn't fit the profile of what powerful people are expected to look like. If I had accepted that treatment, I would have reinforced the system that made it possible. Lawrence nodded, his expression thoughtful. There's a difference between picking your battles and surrendering battles that need to be fought. You recognized which kind that was. The conversation paused as Sophia returned with a light meal. A simple but exquisite selection of organic dishes prepared by a renowned chef before departure. She arranged the plates on the polished mahogany table with practiced efficiency, then retreated to give them privacy. As they began to eat, Lawrence returned to the subject. Have you ever wondered what happened to him? To Hargrove. Maya set down her fork, considering the question. The silverware made a soft, refined clink against the fine china plate. I know he was terminated from Summit. Barrett told me they had a zero-tolerance policy for that kind of behavior, especially toward clients. Beyond that, she shrugged slightly. I haven't followed his story. Do you feel any satisfaction in what happened to him? Lawrence asked, his tone neutral, genuinely curious, rather than judgmental. Maya considered the question carefully, watching the play of light on her water glass as the aircraft banked slightly to adjust course. Not satisfaction, no. There's no joy in someone losing their livelihood regardless of the circumstances. But I do believe in consequences, in accountability. She looked out the window again, gathering her thoughts. What Hargrove did wasn't a momentary lapse or an innocent mistake. It was the manifestation of deeply held biases that he had never examined or challenged. The kind of biases that can harm people who don't have the resources or position to defend themselves. Lawrence nodded, understanding the distinction she was making. Not revenge, but accountability. Exactly, Maya confirmed. I didn't want to destroy his life, but I did want him to face real consequences for his actions. Consequences that might force him to confront the prejudices that led to those actions in the first place. She took a sip of her tea, then continued. And more importantly, I wanted Summit Aviation to recognize that this wasn't just about one problematic employee. It was about a culture that had allowed someone like Hargrove to feel comfortable expressing those biases in a professional setting. And they have, Lawrence noted. Barrett has transformed Summit's approach to diversity and inclusion. The changes have been substantial enough that other companies in the industry are following suit. That's the outcome I hoped for, Maya said. Not just punishing one person, but creating lasting change that benefits others who might have faced similar treatment. The conversation shifted to other topics. The summit in Geneva, the integration of their recently acquired research facility in Zurich, the promising early results from their newest gene therapy candidates. But the discussion of the Hargrove incident lingered in Maya's thoughts. She had never sought vengeance or taken pleasure in Hargrove's downfall. What she had wanted, what she had insisted upon, was accountability not just from one pilot, but from an entire system that had tolerated and enabled bias for decades. The G650 continued its journey eastward, carrying Maya toward Geneva and the next chapter in Helios's mission to transform genetic medicine. The confrontation with Hargrove had become a footnote in her narrative, important not for what it had taken from him, but for what it had affirmed about her, that she would not be diminished, would not be displaced, would not be defined by anyone else's limitations or prejudices. And as the aircraft soared through the night sky, Maya Rhodes felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle. The G650 was no longer just an aircraft she had leased. It was a space she had claimed not through force or position, but through the simple, powerful assertion of her right to be there. That assertion had rippled outward, creating change far beyond that single confrontation. And while Maya took no joy in the personal consequences Hargrove had faced, she could take pride in the broader transformation his actions had inadvertently catalyzed. A transformation that would benefit countless others who might otherwise have faced the same judgment and dismissal she had encountered that day in Aspen. It wasn't a perfect resolution. The aviation industry, like society as a whole, still had a long way to go in addressing deeply entrenched biases and inequalities. But it was progress, meaningful, verifiable progress. And sometimes that was enough. As the G650 began its initial descent toward Geneva International Airport, Maya closed her laptop and turned her attention to Lawrence Williams. Their conversation earlier had touched on the Hargrove incident, but there was a deeper question that had been lingering in her mind, one that went beyond the specifics of that confrontation to the broader implications of how she had handled it. "Lawrence," she began, her tone thoughtful, "do you think there was a better way I could have handled the situation with Hargrove? Not just for my own dignity, but for creating meaningful change." Lawrence set aside the clinical data he had been reviewing and gave Maya his full attention. As her mentor and the chairman of Helios's board, he had guided her through countless professional challenges, but he had always been careful to let her make her own decisions and find her own path. "That's an interesting question," he replied, considering it carefully. His fingers tapped lightly against the armrest, a habit he had when thinking deeply. "Do you have reservations about how you responded?" Maya shook her head slightly. "Not reservations exactly, more reflections. I've been thinking about the difference between power and authority, between punishment and accountability." Lawrence nodded, understanding the distinction she was drawing. "You had both the power and the authority in that situation. The question was how to use them." "Exactly," Maya agreed, leaning forward slightly. "I could have escalated differently. I could have raised my voice, made a scene, recorded the interaction, and shared it publicly. I could have humiliated Hargrove in front of his crew, threatened legal action against him personally as well as Summit. But you didn't." Lawrence observed, his eyes reflecting the soft cabin lighting. "No," Maya confirmed. "I bypassed him entirely. I went straight to Barrett, to someone whose authority even Hargrove couldn't question. I made it about accountability rather than retribution." Lawrence leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "There's an important principle there. What you did wasn't about asserting dominance or inflicting humiliation. It was about establishing a standard and ensuring consequences for violating that standard. That's what I've been reflecting on," Maya said. "The difference between using power as a weapon and using it as a tool for change." The G650 banked gently as it established its approach path to Geneva, the lights of the city beginning to appear below them. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. "Dr. Rhodes, Dr. Williams, we're beginning our final descent into Geneva. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all loose items are secured." After acknowledging the announcement, Lawrence returned to their conversation. You know, Maya, there's something I've observed about truly effective leaders over the years. They understand that power isn't just about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do. Maya nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. Restraint as a form of strength. Precisely, Lawrence said, his voice taking on the measured tone he used when sharing insights drawn from decades of experience. Anyone with enough authority can destroy a career, ruin a reputation, inflict punishment. But it takes a different kind of leadership to create positive change from a negative situation. To transform, rather than merely condemn. That's what I was trying to achieve, Maya admitted. Not just consequences for Hargrove, but meaningful change at Summit Aviation, and perhaps in the industry as a whole. And you succeeded, Lawrence pointed out. Barrett could have simply fired Hargrove and considered the matter closed. A sacrificial employee to appease a valuable client. Instead, he recognized the opportunity, or perhaps the necessity, for deeper transformation. That wouldn't have happened if you had approached the situation differently. Maya considered this perspective. So, you think the restraint I showed actually created more meaningful change than a more aggressive response would have? I do, Lawrence confirmed, leaning forward to emphasize his point. By focusing on accountability rather than revenge, you gave Barrett and Summit Aviation the space to address the underlying issues, rather than just managing a PR crisis. You made it about principles rather than personalities. The lights of Geneva grew closer as the G650 continued its descent. Sophia moved through the cabin, ensuring everything was secure for landing. The conversation paused briefly as she collected their cups and plates, then resumed once she had returned to her seat. There's something else I've been considering, Maya said, her voice quieter now. The responsibility that comes with success and visibility. As Helios has grown, as our profile has increased, I've become more aware of the impact my actions can have beyond their immediate context. Lawrence nodded, understanding immediately. The platform effect. The more successful you become, the more weight your words and actions carry. Exactly. Maya agreed. When I was starting Helios, fighting for funding and recognition, I was focused primarily on survival and advancement. Now, with the company established and growing, I find myself thinking more about legacy. Not just what we accomplish scientifically, but how we accomplish it. That's a sign of mature leadership, Lawrence observed. Moving from achievement to impact, from success to significance. Maya smiled slightly at his characterization. I wouldn't claim to be there yet, but it's something I'm working toward. Understanding that how I use the platform and power I've earned is perhaps as important as what I've built with it. The G650 descended through the cloud layer, revealing the sparkling lights of Geneva spread out below. The city, with its international organizations and global influence, seemed an appropriate backdrop for their conversation about power and responsibility. You know, Lawrence said thoughtfully, what happened with Hargrove could be seen as a pivotal moment in your evolution as a leader. Not because you asserted your authority, you had been doing that successfully for years, but because of how you chose to wield that authority. Maya considered this perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're right. It was a situation where I had to decide not just what to do, but what kind of leader, what kind of person I wanted to be. And you chose the harder path, Lawrence noted. It would have been easier, and perhaps more immediately satisfying, to publicly humiliate Hargrove, to demand not just his termination, but his public disgrace. Instead, you focused on creating conditions for meaningful change. That requires a level of perspective and self-discipline that's rare even among successful leaders. The aircraft made its final approach to the runway, the gentle rumble of the landing gear deploying a reminder of their imminent arrival. Captain Reynolds executed a perfect touchdown, the G650's wheels kissing the tarmac with barely a bump before the thrust reversers engaged to slow the aircraft. As they taxied toward the private terminal, Maya returned to the core of their conversation. I think what I've learned through all of this is that true leadership isn't about wielding power. It's about wielding influence. Not just changing what people do, but changing how they think and what they value. Lawrence smiled, a look of genuine pride in his eyes. That's a profound insight, Maya. And it's exactly what you've achieved with Summit Aviation. Barrett didn't just fire Hargrove. He transformed his company's approach to diversity and inclusion. That's not compliance. That's conversion. And it's a far more lasting legacy than any punishment could have been. The G650 came to a stop outside the private terminal, its engines winding down as Captain Reynolds completed the shutdown procedures. Through the window, Maya could see their waiting car, a black Mercedes S-Class, positioned near the terminal entrance. "We've arrived," she said, gathering her belongings. "Just in time to continue this conversation over dinner. I think there's more to explore here about leadership and responsibility." Lawrence nodded in agreement as they prepared to disembark. There always is. That's what makes it both challenging and rewarding. As Maya descended the air stairs to the tarmac, the cool evening air of Geneva, a welcome change from the artificial atmosphere of the aircraft, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The confrontation with Hargrove a year earlier had been a defining moment, not because of what she had gained or what he had lost, but because of the principle it had affirmed and the transformation it had inspired. That was the true measure of leadership, not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to transform, not the authority to punish, but the vision to create meaningful, lasting change. It was a standard she would continue to hold herself to, not just in managing Helios's growth, but in navigating all the challenges and opportunities that success had brought her way. And as she walked toward the waiting car, Maya Rhodes carried that understanding with her, a quiet commitment to a kind of leadership defined not by position or power, but by principle and purpose. The World Health Innovation Summit in Geneva had concluded triumphantly for Maya Rhodes. Her keynote address on the future of gene therapy had been received with enthusiasm and acclaim, establishing Helios Biotherapeutics as a global leader in the field. More importantly, the connections she had made with researchers, physicians, and patient advocates from around the world had opened new avenues for collaboration that could accelerate the development and distribution of Helios's life-changing treatments. Now, as the G650 prepared for its return journey to Teterboro, Maya stood on the tarmac at Geneva International Airport, engaged in conversation with Dr. Amara Okafor, a brilliant young neurologist from Lagos, whose research on genetic factors in early-onset Parkinson's disease had caught her attention during the summit. The spring air carried the scent of nearby alpine flowers, and the mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow, despite the warming season. The tarmac buzzed with the activity of ground crews preparing various private aircraft for departure, while the distinctive sounds of jet engines spooling up and down created a constantly shifting sonic backdrop. The fellowship program would provide full funding for a year at our research facility in New Jersey. Maya explained, her passion evident in her voice. You'd have access to our entire platform and the opportunity to develop your treatment approach with our support. Dr. Okafor's eyes widened at the opportunity. That would be transformative, she replied, her Nigerian accent giving a musical quality to her words. Not just for my research, but potentially for thousands of patients across Africa who currently have no effective treatment options. Exactly. Maya agreed. That's why we created the Global Innovation Fellowship, to ensure that groundbreaking research isn't limited by geography or resources. As they exchanged contact information to formalize the invitation, Maya noticed a young woman observing them from near the terminal entrance. She was in her early 20s, wearing the uniform of a flight academy cadet, her expression a mixture of hesitation and determination. After concluding her conversation with Dr. Okafor and promising to have her team follow up immediately, Maya approached the young woman, curious about her evident interest. "Hello," Maya said warmly. "Can I help you with something?" The cadet straightened her posture, becoming more formal. "Dr. Rhodes, I'm Zara Jefferson. I'm in my final year at the European Flight Academy." She hesitated, then continued with more confidence. "I just wanted to say that your story, what happened last year with that pilot, it changed things for people like me." Maya was surprised by the reference, but maintained her composure. The Hargrove incident had never been publicly disclosed, constrained by the non-disclosure agreement Summit Aviation had implemented. But within aviation circles, particularly among women and minorities in the field, the story had apparently circulated. "I'm not sure what you've heard," Maya replied carefully, "but I'm interested in how it affected you." Zara's expression became more animated. Before, when instructors or senior pilots made comments about whether women, especially women of color, belonged in certain positions, in the cockpit of premium aircraft flying for elite clients, we just had to take it. Keep our heads down. Prove ourselves twice as hard. She gestured toward the G650 on the tarmac, where Captain Diana Reynolds was conducting her pre-flight inspection. Reynolds moved with confident efficiency, her experienced eye checking each critical component of the sophisticated aircraft. But after what happened with Summit Aviation, after they fired that senior captain and implemented all those changes, the conversation changed. People realized there were actual consequences for that kind of behavior. It wasn't just acceptable anymore. Maya was moved by the young woman's words, by the unexpected ripple effects of a confrontation she had viewed primarily in personal terms. "I'm glad something positive came from that situation," she said sincerely. More than something, Zara insisted, her voice gaining strength. "It created space for people like me. The Flight Academy has implemented new anti-bias training for instructors. There's a mentorship program specifically for women and minorities. Summit Aviation's scholarship initiative is making it possible for students who couldn't afford flight training to pursue their dreams." Maya glanced again at Captain Reynolds, now climbing the stairs to the G650's cockpit. The sun glinted off her captain's stripes as she disappeared into the aircraft. "Have you considered applying to Summit when you complete your training?" Zara's eyes lit up. "It's my goal. Their new recruiting program actively seeks candidates from diverse backgrounds. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even applied, wouldn't have seen the point. Now I have a real chance." The conversation was interrupted by Sofia Rodriguez appearing at the top of the G650's air stairs. "Dr. Rhodes, Captain Reynolds says we're cleared for departure whenever you're ready." Maya nodded. Acknowledgement, then turned back to Zara. "I should go, but I want you to have this." She reached into her bag and retrieved one of her business cards, writing a note on the back before handing it to the young cadet. "When you're ready to apply to Summit, email me directly. I can't guarantee anything, but I can make sure your application gets serious consideration." Zara accepted the card with visible emotion. "Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. I won't disappoint you." "I'm sure you won't," Maya replied with a smile. "Aviation needs more diverse perspectives and experiences. It makes the industry stronger, safer, and more innovative." As Maya walked toward the G650, she felt a profound sense of completion, of having witnessed firsthand the positive change that had emanated from that confrontation a year earlier. What had begun as a personal affront, one woman being told she didn't belong, had catalyzed a transformation that was now creating opportunities for others who might have faced similar judgment and dismissal. Ascending the air stairs, Maya was greeted by Sophia with professional warmth. The summit seemed to go well, Dr. Rhodes. We saw some of your keynote on the live stream while we were waiting. It was productive, Maya confirmed as she settled into her customary seat. New connections, new possibilities. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. Welcome aboard, Dr. Rhodes. We're cleared for departure to Teterboro. Weather looks good all the way, and we should arrive on schedule. Thank you, Captain Reynolds, Maya responded, appreciating the pilot's consistent professionalism and courtesy. As the G650 taxied toward the runway, Maya looked out at the terminal, where Zara Jefferson still stood watching the aircraft with evident admiration. The young cadet raised her hand in a gesture that was half wave, half salute, an acknowledgement between two women who understood in different ways the importance of claiming space in worlds where they had historically been excluded. Maya returned the gesture, feeling a connection with this aspiring pilot she had just met. Zara's career was just beginning, full of potential and possibility, partly because barriers that might have blocked her path were being dismantled. Barriers that Maya's confrontation with Hargrove had helped to identify and challenge. The G650 accelerated down the runway and lifted gracefully into the Swiss sky, banking gently as it established its course toward New Jersey. Maya watched Geneva recede beneath them, the city growing smaller as the aircraft climbed through scattered clouds toward its cruising altitude. The powerful engines quickly propelled them upward, the sensation of acceleration pressing Maya gently back into her seat. The landscape below transformed from the detailed tapestry of buildings, roads, and parks to a miniature model, and finally to an abstract pattern of colors and textures as they continued to climb. Sophia approached with a cup of herbal tea. Your chamomile, Dr. Rhodes. Would you like me to prepare a light meal for the journey home? That would be lovely, Sophia. Thank you. As Sophia returned to the galley, Maya reflected on the unexpected encounter with Zara Jefferson and what it represented. The confrontation with Hargrove had never been about just one pilot or one passenger. It had been about challenging a system that had too long accepted bias as normal, that had allowed certain spaces to remain exclusive by design or by default. The changes at Summit Aviation, the new hiring practices, the training programs, the scholarship initiatives, were creating tangible opportunities for people who might otherwise have been excluded from the premium private aviation industry. And those changes were rippling outward, influencing other companies, flight academies, and industry organizations. Maya had never sought to be an activist or a catalyst for industry-wide change. Her focus had always been on her scientific research and building Helios into a company that could transform genetic medicine. But in standing her ground that day on the G650, in refusing to accept being treated as if she didn't belong, she had inadvertently become part of a larger movement toward a more inclusive and equitable aviation industry. As the G650 reached its cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, soaring high above the Atlantic Ocean on its journey westward, Maya felt a sense of perspective that matched their physical elevation. From this height, individual conflicts and personal grievances seemed small and transient. What endured, what mattered, were the principles at stake and the lasting changes that emerged from standing firm in defense of those principles. The encounter with Zara Jefferson had provided something Maya hadn't realized she needed: confirmation that the ripple effects of that confrontation had extended far beyond her personal experience, creating opportunities and inspiration for others who faced similar barriers. William Hargrove's career had ended because of his actions that day, a consequence that Maya had never sought, but had recognized as necessary for accountability. But more importantly, doors had opened for people like Zara Jefferson, aspiring pilots who might otherwise have been discouraged or excluded from pursuing their dreams in premium private aviation. That was the true resolution of the confrontation aboard the G650, not the downfall of one prejudiced pilot, but the beginning of a transformation that was creating space for those who had previously been told explicitly or implicitly that they didn't belong. As the G650 continued its journey westward, carrying Maya back to New Jersey, and the next chapter in Helios's mission, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, not in having won a confrontation, but in having stood for a principle that was now creating meaningful change far beyond that single incident. The aircraft, once the site of conflict and exclusion, had become a symbol of that transformation, a space where everyone aboard was valued for their professional contributions, rather than judged by their appearance or background. And for Maya Rhodes, that was a resolution more meaningful and enduring than any personal vindication could have been. 1 year after the confrontation aboard the Gulfstream G650, the worlds of Maya Rhodes and William Hargrove had diverged completely. Maya had led Helios Biotherapeutics through a successful IPO and FDA approval for their groundbreaking gene therapy, transforming treatment options for thousands of patients while building a company valued at over $14 billion. Hargrove had lost his prestigious position, his financial security, and his professional identity, reduced to flying cargo planes through the night to maintain some connection to the aviation career that had once defined him. Yet beyond these individual journeys lay a more significant transformation. The confrontation between them had catalyzed meaningful change throughout the private aviation industry. Summit Aviation had implemented comprehensive reforms in hiring, training, and corporate culture. Other companies had followed suit, recognizing both the moral imperative and the business advantage of creating truly inclusive environments. Flight academies had established scholarships and mentorship programs for underrepresented groups, expanding the pipeline of diverse talent entering the field. For Maya, the incident had become a footnote in her remarkable journey, important not for the conflict itself, but for the principle it represented, that dignity is not contingent on fitting someone else's profile, that belonging is not determined by appearance or background, but by merit and humanity. For Hargrove, it had been a devastating lesson in the consequences of unchallenged bias, a mirror that had forced him to confront prejudices he had never acknowledged even to himself. The true measure of that day's significance, however, lay not in its impact on either Maya or Hargrove, but in the doors it had opened for others, for the Zara Jeffersons of the world, who might now find pathways into spaces where they had previously been excluded or marginalized. It was a reminder that standing firm against prejudice, even in seemingly small moments, can create ripples of change that extend far beyond the immediate confrontation. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to decide whether to accept unfair treatment or stand your ground? This story reminds us that sometimes one person's courage can transform not just their own situation, but an entire system. If you found this story powerful, please consider sharing it with others who might be inspired by Maya's example. Like and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories that challenge us to create a more inclusive world. Remember, true change begins when we refuse to accept the limitations others try to place on us, when we claim our rightful place and hold systems accountable not just for ourselves, but for everyone who will come after us.